Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy. Back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Becomes Lord of Serpents? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was a relatively quiet morning in the Yagi household, but that calm was soon interrupted by a pair of excited 4-year-old kids. They burst through their parents' bedroom door, waking them up. "Mom! Dad!" the siblings yelled in unison, jumping on their now-awake parents. "Get up! We want to see what our quirks are!" Izumi exclaimed, practically bouncing in her seat. Inko chuckled and pulled her two little angels into a hug. "Let's eat breakfast first. We don't want to hear such good news on an empty stomach, do we?" she said, helping her family get up and ready to go to the quirkologist's office. Izuku and Izumi rambled and squealed during the car ride, unable to contain their excitement. They were about to discover their quirks, and Izuku could analyze them so they could form the perfect hero trio with Kaken. How could they stay still when the most important moment of their lives, aside from graduating from UA, was about to happen? As soon as the car stopped, the twins bolted out with their All Might and Viridian Tornado figurines in hand, determined not to forget them, while their parents struggled to keep up. Inko and Tashinori shared in their children's excitement, reminiscing about their own childhood. They arrived just in time, avoiding a long wait. Everything felt amazing until they reached Izuku's diagnosis. "He's quirkless." "I'm sorry," the doctor said. Izuku dropped his figurine, staring blankly at the doctor, who glanced at him with pity before explaining how this could happen. But Izuku wasn't really listening. He didn't have a quirk. How could he be like All Might without one? Izumi had a stronger version of their mom's quirk, and Kaken could create explosions from his sweat. How could he compete with that? He followed his mom and Izumi out the door, feeling lost while they remained blissfully unaware of his internal turmoil. Tashinori waited in the car, looking worried when he saw Izuku trailing behind a cheerful Izumi and Inko. Inko whispered something to her husband while glancing at Izuku, who was trying to get into the car on his own. Once he settled into his seat, he was breathing heavily, oblivious to the concerned expression on his father's face. The ride home was filled with joy, but there was an underlying tension that neither twin noticed, one too caught up in her excitement, and the other questioning how he could still be a hero. When they arrived home, Inko ordered pizza to celebrate. Izuku, however, said he wasn't hungry, raising concern among his family. He went to his room, feeling detached. They assumed he was upset about being quirkless and decided to let him be. In his room, Izuku grabbed his iPad and watched his favorite clip of All Might, who was smiling while saving civilians, reassuring them that he was there and everything would be okay. In that moment, Izuku decided he would become a hero, no matter what. Izumi approached her best friend with a worried expression. She had asked her parents why Izuku seemed so sad the day before, and they explained that being quirkless meant he wouldn't be able to be a hero, as it was too dangerous. At first, she felt sad about their trio being broken, but she knew she would have to deal with that later. Her brother was stubborn, and she believed he wouldn't give up easily. That's why she decided to go to Kaken. He was just as smart as her brother, so he should know what to do. "Kaken," she called out as she ran toward him. He turned around, his frown quickly transforming into a grin when he recognized her. "What's your quirk?" "It can't be better than mine, but it better be a close second, nerd," he teased, though she knew he wasn't trying to be mean, it was just his way. "I have really strong telekinesis. I can carry 1.5 tons. The doctor said it would get even stronger when I train," she replied with a grin, but then her expression shifted. They could discuss being a hero duo later. Right now, Izuku needed help. "That's not important right now. Izuku's quirkless, but I know he still wants to be a hero. I don't know what to do. If he tries to be a hero, he could get hurt." Izumi exclaimed, her eyes welling with tears. This was serious. Her brother's future was at stake. Kaken's grin faded as he processed her words. He didn't know what to do either. So, they decided to seek help from a teacher. After a bit of convincing, they made their way to their favorite teacher. Mrs. Okamare was in her mid-40s, with pastel purple hair, fair skin, light freckles, and green eyes. The students adored her because her quirk allowed her to create beautiful flowers from smoke in the palm of her hand. Izumi tugged on her pants and asked, "Mrs. Okamare? Can I ask you a question?" Okamare turned around and smiled gently at the two children. "Of course, dear. You can always ask me something." Izumi beamed at her, but her smile quickly faded as she asked, "Izuku's quirkless, but I know he still wants to be a hero. Mom and Dad said it's too dangerous for him. I don't want him to die." Okamare's smile turned tense as she listened to Izumi, who was now in tears. She couldn't understand why two kids with such heroic quirks would care about someone without a quirk. But in the end, she was still an educator. She would have to teach them that there were more important things to consider than someone who seemed unevolved. She looked at them sadly, though her concern wasn't for Izuku as the kids thought. "I'm afraid tough love is the only option. If he can't see that being a hero can be dangerous, you have to show him why." The two kids looked incredibly sad after hearing her, but after a few seconds, their eyes lit up with determination. They nodded their heads, and she smiled again, glad that she managed to guide the two young heroes toward a better path. Although it would take a bit longer to prepare them for the journey of heroism. Izumi and Katsuki ran off to find Izuku. They found him swinging on the swing set, looking downtrodden. Katsuki approached him first, with Izumi following closely behind. "Hey Izuku, do you still want to be a hero?" Katsuki asked, blunt as ever. Izuku looked up, surprised, but his face quickly morphed into determination as he nodded and replied confidently, "Yeah, I'm going to be the first quirkless hero ever." He raised his fist in the air for motivation. But instead of the supportive response he expected from Izumi and the grumpy yet happy reaction from Kaken, he received a sneer and a shove. Shocked, he looked up at Kaken. "Don't even think of standing in our way. You're quirkless. You'll never make it to a hero school, so give up." Katsuki yelled, his hands crackling with small explosions. Izuku, frightened by this turn of events, glanced at his twin sister, searching for reassurance. But she was glaring at him, her expression cold. He felt frozen, unable to comprehend why she was looking at him like that. He had never bullied anyone he never would. So why was she treating him this way? Seeing the terror in Izuku's eyes, Katsuki scoffed and left, with Izumi following behind him. They didn't like what they had done, but someone had to ensure Izuku was safe. They were going to be heroes, after all, so they could start saving people even now. Izumi and Kaken were really mean now. Izuku knew they weren't joking anymore. It had been a year and a half, and he understood that neither his sister nor Kaken had the patience for such games. But he didn't understand why. He hadn't done anything wrong. It wasn't like he could change the fact that he was quirkless. He sat quietly at his desk, lost in thought, not noticing that Katsuki, Katsumi, and Izumi were approaching him with their friends behind them. Katsumi had switched kindergartens again because her friend had moved away, and she insisted on staying with her. But Ashiya was in America now, and she couldn't follow her, so she transferred back here. Unfortunately for Izuku, she was just as determined to keep him safe as the other two were. "Hey Deku." That was new. Kaken had come up with it, saying the name fit perfectly since Izuku was quirkless. Izumi didn't look as excited as Katsumi did but didn't stop them either. Izuku flinched and stuttered in reply, "Weiss, Kaken?" Both blondes glared at him, with Izumi's usual cold stare from behind them. "Are you looking down on us, Deku?" Katsumi yelled, explosions popping in her hands. Izuku stood up and scrambled backward, though it didn't help as his bullies closed in on him. When he saw he was about to be backed into a corner, he tried to run out of the classroom. Unfortunately, Izumi was right in his path, and her instinct kicked in when she saw something rushing at her. Too bad that instinct led her to use her quirk to fling whatever was sprinting at her into a wall. The classroom fell silent for a moment before Izuku got up from where he had fallen. Before he could even sit up straight, Katsuki approached him and pushed him down again. "Stay in your place, Deku," he snarled, feeling satisfied with the impact he had made. Katsuki turned around with a grin and walked out of the classroom, the rest of the kids following him. Some sent concerned glances his way, looking visibly uncomfortable, but they didn't dare say anything when the kids with heroic quirks were so hostile toward him. Izumi was the last to leave, but before she did, she looked back at Izuku, who was staring at her with tears streaming down his face. She wore a pained expression but quickly left when she heard the Bakugo twins calling for her. "Hey, Zumi! What's taking so long?" And with that, Izuku was left alone in the classroom. It took him a few seconds to go from quietly crying to full-on sobbing. Why would they do that? Being mean was one thing, but this was even worse. His shoulder hurt so much he could barely move. He stopped trying to get up and curled up on the floor, making sure his shoulder didn't touch anything. He wanted his parents, even if they looked sad when he was in the room, they would still comfort him. He lay there, curled up for half an hour, before a teacher came in. "What are you doing here?" "School let out half an hour ago." Izuku used to like Mrs. Okamare, but after he was diagnosed as quirkless, she had outright ignored him. She was the worst of all the teachers. But even then, she was still a teacher. She could help him, right? Izuku looked up at the annoyed face of Mrs. Okamare and spoke. "Kaken was really mean. He hurt my shoulder." His voice was hoarse from crying and it hurt to speak. But Mrs. Okamare seemed more annoyed than concerned. "You are probably egging them on. It's not their fault that you keep provoking them." Izuku started to cry again. He hadn't provoked them. They were just being really mean. He didn't get to finish as Mrs. Okamare interrupted him again. "No excuses. You're here far too late and I have to lock the classroom." She firmly grabbed him by the arm and led him out of the classroom, then out of the building, despite his protests. With no other choice, he had to walk home. Normally, his mom and dad would come to pick him up, but he couldn't see them anywhere. It took him another half hour to get home, including the breaks he had to take because his shoulder hurt quite a bit. When he got home, he saw Izumi crying with mom and dad trying to comfort her. They both quickly noticed that Izuku had returned and looked very concerned at the burn on his shoulder. Izuku. Izumi sobbed into her mother's shoulder while their mother comforted her. Dad came over to him and examined the burn. Judging by his expression, the news wasn't good. "Izuku. Hee. Izumi hiccuped and pointed at her brother, who was also in tears. He was being really mean to Kaken, and he got mad at him. She started sobbing again into her mom's shoulder. Dad looked at Izuku with a disapproving gaze. "You shouldn't provoke Katsuki like that. You know how he is, especially with his quirk." Dad's gaze shifted to the burn mark on his shoulder. Izuku looked rapidly between his dad and sister. Why was she lying? He hadn't provoked anyone. I didn't. I was just sitting and doing my homework, and they were being really mean." Before he could continue, Dad interrupted him with a stern tone. "It's not right to lie, my boy. You should apologize to young Katsuki before this ruins your friendship." Izuku couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I didn't provoke him. He hurt me, and Izumi pushed me against a wall." He cried out to his parents. They knew he wouldn't lie to them. They'd ask Izumi and she'd tell the truth. She was never a good liar. But that didn't happen. Instead, Dad shook his head in frustration and replied, "Enough, my boy. Go to your room, and you'll apologize to young Bakugo tomorrow morning." Izuku looked up at him, on the verge of tears. But that is final." Toshinori snapped at him, and Izuku flinched, stepping back. He looked at his mom to see if she'd agree with him, but all he received was a disappointed stare in return. Unable to bear it any longer, Izuku ran to his room, crying. He slammed the door behind him and jumped onto his All Might-themed sheets. But he ended up landing on the shoulder Kaken had burned. Rolling onto his other side, which didn't hurt, he curled up into a ball and started sobbing again. Why were mom and dad being mean too? Maybe his family wasn't so great. Izuku could still remember all the warm hugs and happy moments from before his diagnosis, but there hadn't been any afterwards. Just comparing the two made it seem like they were two completely different lives. He knew it wasn't as bad as others had it. His classmates always said that his parents would be better off abandoning him, but they hadn't done that. Even if they sometimes forgot his portions at the dinner table and didn't really talk to him much, they still kept him. But if he felt sad over something like this, what about people who had it worse? That was the train of thought that led him to online forums. He'd overheard older kids at school mention forums for all kinds of people, so there were probably some other quirkless kids there. It took him a while to find one that seemed to have some quirkless people in it. He wanted to help those with weaker or villainous quirks as much as he could, but his experiences lay more in quirkless discrimination than other types. Unfortunately, the chat was in English, but Izuku thought he could at least understand it, even if his teachers said he was slower than the other kids. But he would never know unless he tried. He clicked on the link he thought would let him chat with people. He had never done this before, so it took some time to figure it out. This house is on fire. Best Genist Kinney, why shouldn't I microwave a pickle? There's nothing wrong with that. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles, why on earth would you want to microwave a pickle? User 46892 has joined. Best Genist Kinney, it's for science, you wouldn't understand. Skyrim Dude, oh, we've got someone new. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles, since when were you here? User 46892, hi? By Disaster Human, you aren't going to insult us for our quirks or identities like the last guy, are you? Hobbit, PSS off, Gray. User 46892, no. I would never. Skyrim Dude, good, I don't want to block even more people. User 46892, do you have to do that often? Skyrim Dude, to the point where it's not even funny, just sad. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles, let's do introductions. It's been a while since someone who wasn't a JRK joined. Hobbit, but we barely know them? Bestinist Kinney, schematics schmamsticks, there aren't nearly enough of you here to see me. It's about time you add another person to your fold. Gray Graham, added. And I think it's better to just introduce ourselves so it doesn't get too confusing for him or them. Skyrim Dude, and not your real name because of obvious reasons. Lightning McQueen, I'll go first. People here call me McQueen, after a children's movie from the 2000s. My quirk is called Dash. It lets me move 4 times as fast as humanly possible and creates sparks as a trail. I can't use it more than twice a day, and if I use it longer than 5 seconds, I'll start electrocuting myself. You don't have to add this, but the reason I'm in this chat room is that my mom's an abusive drunk, but because she's a hero, the police won't do anything to stop her. My pronouns are currently he, him, but I'll let you know when it changes. I'm 14, and I have no clue what my sexuality is. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles, how in the world can you type that fast? Lightning McQueen, talent, my dear. Hobbit, that has to be the worst pun in existence. User 46892, should I go next? Best Genist Kinney, you have to go last, otherwise it ruins the effect. Gray Graham, ruins. Hobbit, again. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles. I'm next. Please call me Fawn, it's also my quirk. Fawn gives me ram horns, cute little ears. If you're going to call me cute, please don't say it's because you look like a baby animal. It's annoying and makes my lower body resemble that of a deer, complete with 4 hooved feet and white spots on top. I'm here because people can't seem to understand that I don't like being called cute, and when I express my frustration, they label me at Sundara. Basically, people can be frustrating. My pronouns are she, her. I'm 12, and I'm still figuring out my sexuality. 14. I just noticed that by the ages, both of you forgot to put PRDS after your stated age. Hobbit. Griffin. Please stop. Best Genist Kinney. My turn now. Please call me Genist, new friend. My magnificent quirk allows me to freeze any fibers in place so people can't move. Unfortunately, I can't undo it. That's my only downside. Maybe I could train my quirk to do that, but I haven't experimented with it much. I'm here because people tend to get offended that I don't want to be a hero. It's not the only profession, you know, and they either ridicule me or avoid me altogether. My pronouns are they, them. I'm 13, and I'm about 80% sure I'm pan. 55. Again with the age, and now the pronouns and sexuality too. Hobbit. I swear to whatever god is out there. Skyrim Dude. Please don't fight. It's 5:30 in the morning where I'm at. It's way too early. User 46892. But it's 12:30? Discount Elsa. A fellow fan. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles. How many people are online and just haven't said anything? Discriminatibitch. I'm here too. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles. Oh, for goodness sake. Skyrim dude. To answer the new person's question, this is one of the international chat rooms. There are people from all over the place here. I myself am from Denmark. By disaster human. We can discuss countries later, we still haven't done all the introductions yet. You can call me by. My quirk is called Rat Swarm. It lets me summon a horde of rats that will do whatever I tell them to. If you want to learn more about it, go look up the Canadian Hero School Oshawa's second years. I joined this chat a few years ago, and I'd rather not say why. My pronouns are he, him. I'm 16, and as my username suggests, I'm a proud bisexual intellectual. 32. I'm speeding this up. You can call me Gray. My quirk is called Black and White. Anyone I touch with 5 fingers will see everything in black and white until I clap my hands so they can see color again. I'd also like to keep my reasons for joining a secret for now. And just a heads up, my little brother sometimes uses my account to chat with everyone here. He's quirkless, and if you have a problem with that, I won't hesitate to defend him. My pronouns are she, her. I'm 14, and I think I'm Arrow Ace. User 46892. Slow down a bit. I'm trying to write all this down. And I have nothing against quirkless people. Great, I wasn't in the mood for any trouble. Discriminatibitch. If you weren't in the mood, I would have stepped in for you. The little kids are sweet. Skyrim dude. I'll go next because I have to head to my job after this. Please call me Skyrim. Fawn thought I looked like the Dragonborn in that game, so that's what I'm called now. My quirk is Draconian. Basically, I look like a giant humanoid dragon, but I don't have wings, and instead of fire, I can unleash thunder. I'm here because people in real life tend to find me intimidating and avoid me, so I decided my social life would be healthier online. My pronouns are he, they. I'll let you know which one to use when I enter a conversation. Currently, I'm a he. I'm turning 18 in 2 weeks, and I'm interested in men. 28. User 46892. You don't sound scary. Skyrim dude. Thanks. But I have to go now, bye. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles. See you. Best Genist Kinney. Goodbye, my favorite peasant. Lightning McQueen. I thought I was your favorite. Best Genist Kinney. I changed my preference. Skyrim dude has gone offline. Discount Elsa. I guess I'll go next. You can call me Elsa, I suppose. My quirk allows me to create small gusts of cold wind, and if I really push myself, I can make some snow with it as well. I'm here because everyone around me was disappointed that my quirk was so weak compared to my siblings, and I wanted to find people to relate to. My pronouns are he, him. If you have a problem with my feminine nickname like Elsa, please leave. I'm 11, and I haven't really thought about my sexuality. Sparkles Fawn Sparkles. We've almost heard from everyone. Now just Hobbit and Discrim. Hobbit. Let's get this over with. Just call me Hobbit. I'm quirkless. My pronouns are she, her. I'm 15, and I'm a lesbian. 20. And now we're back to not ending our sentences with PRDIS. Great. Discriminatibitch. I'm not actually the last, but Coconuts bitch, Insomnicat, and Decufazatus Grace aren't online right now. Just call me Discrim. My quirk is called Fear. It basically makes everyone around me feel intense fear within a 15-meter radius. I can't turn it off, but I can adjust the strength of it, so I can make people incredibly uncomfortable or even faint from terror. I'm here because my quirk doesn't work through technology, and I'm very lonely. My pronouns are xezer. You use them like this? Say is here. I called Zem. Zer hands are wet. That is Zers. Zerself. I'm 16, and I'm pansexual. 54. Best Genist Kinney. Now it is your turn. User 46892. Sure. I don't know what you should call me, but my friends call me Deku. I'm quirkless. I came here because I wanted to help people who are quirkless too. I don't really know what a pronoun is, but I think it's he, him from what I just read. I'm 9, and I don't know what my sexuality is. Discount Elsa. You do know that Deku means useless, right? Sparkles Fawn Sparkles. If it means useless, I'm not calling you that, buddy. User 46892. It's fine. Izuku smiled to himself. It was nice to talk to people who still treated him the same after learning he was quirkless. They had such cool quirks, and one of them was even a hero student. Maybe they'd let him ask questions, and they wouldn't mind if it seemed a bit odd. He curled up under his covers with his notebook, watching the chat on his phone as people bickered and joked with each other. Izuku felt that this was a good choice. Izuku woke up in an empty classroom, groaning as he tried to sit up and remember why he was there. He quickly stopped when he noticed everything spinning and that his head hurt more than usual. This wasn't the first time he had passed out during one of his rough encounters, but it was the first time his head hurt this badly. Maybe it was a concussion? He couldn't check how long he had been unconscious because he left his phone at home. Asking his parents for a new one after his friends broke it wouldn't end well, and he knew he would have to wait a long time before he could speak to his friends again. Izuku felt he might go insane if his support system was taken away from him. Deciding he should get home as soon as possible, Izuku grit his teeth and stood up. It took far too long to get out of the school, ignoring the concerned glances from the janitors and after-school staff. He was one of the few kids, or maybe even the only one, who treated them like people, so they cared for him a bit. However, it wasn't enough for them to intervene in his situation or offer a helping hand. Limping out of the school, he could only walk for a slow 5 minutes before he had to stop. Stepping into an alleyway, he leaned against a wall and slid down to sit. The headache had worsened since he woke up, to the point where his vision was filled with black spots. He couldn't afford to pass out here. In the classroom, the teachers would wake him up and drag him out, but this was an alley. Who knew what could happen to him if he lost consciousness? Shaking his head, Izuku tried to get up again but found it even harder than before. He couldn't even manage to kneel before he fell down again. Even if it hurt, he had to get up. Being unconscious in an unfamiliar place with potential dangers lurking around was a risk he couldn't take. Izuku managed to get on his hands and feet before noticing something approaching him. It was dark in the alley, and his sight was blurry, so he couldn't make out what it was. All he could tell was that it was about his size, completely black, and had yellow eyes. Not to mention, it was headed directly for him and didn't seem to have good intentions. Izuku tried to back up, but he was already against the wall and lacked the strength or coordination to escape. When the figure got closer, he felt an intense burning sensation on his skin, teeth, and eyes. He couldn't even scream due to the pain. The creature slithered up to him, stopping just an inch away from the trembling Izuku. He felt a sharp pain in the back of his shoulder before everything went dark, or so he thought. It felt more like floating in a void while his insides were being rearranged. The pain in his head and teeth faded in comparison, though thankfully his skin was just itching now. It felt like hours passed, sometimes as if scalding hot things were dragged across his body, and then he was dropped into a vat of boiling sludge. Even his previous encounters hadn't been this bad or lasted this long. He didn't know when, but eventually, it felt like he could move again. He had stopped after about an hour due to the pain, feeling that he couldn't pass out from it, but he was utterly exhausted. Izuku opened his eyes, hissing as a sharp pain shot through them. Strangely, that hiss didn't sound human at all. In fact, it was unlike anything he had ever heard before. Realizing this, he decided it was time to leave the alley. Staying there any longer wouldn't be wise. As he got up, he felt his skin still throbbing with pain, but he had to get home first, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to search for answers about what was happening to him. This wasn't just a concussion. He tried to open his eyes again, blinking away the discomfort. Looking around, he found something very disturbing. Izuku was in his room. He had previously lost consciousness in an alley that was a good 15 minutes away from home. Panic set in as he realized everything hurt, and while the concussion felt less severe, it was still present. He wanted to groan in frustration but instead let out that unsettling hiss again. Before he could ponder what was happening to him, he heard a thankfully normal-sounding hiss from his left. Turning his head, Izuku's eyes widened when he saw a much larger black snake with golden eyes staring at him. That would have been frightening enough, but then he noticed two identical snakes behind the first. Scrambling backward, Izuku instinctively raised his arms to shield himself and shut his eyes, bracing for an attack. After a few seconds of silence, he hesitantly opened his eyes. What terrified him even more was that his normally tan skin had turned a sickly gray. The freckles on his arms had also changed colors, shifting from a chocolatey brown to a dark gray, almost black. He quickly inspected his arms, turning them to see what was happening. Did someone drag him while he was asleep? Izuku couldn't think of any other reason for such vivid hallucinations. Glancing back at the three snakes, he noticed they had slithered closer together but hadn't approached him. Confusion washed over him, but he quickly stopped as he felt his eyelids closing in an unusual manner. Maybe it was less of a normal drag and more of a quirk-induced experience? He didn't know any kids at his school with such an interesting quirk, but his friends had convinced a girl from another school, if he remembered correctly. Her name was Shoka, to tease him, so he wouldn't put it past them. Panicking and unsure of what to do, he grabbed his phone to reach out to the only people who seemed to care about him. Izuku quickly opened his phone, trying to ignore how different his arms looked. As he opened the chat, he realized his room was incredibly dark, and he was nearly blinded by the screen. Apparently, he now had excellent night vision. This had to be a quirk. No known drag could do this. He quickly typed the first thing that came to mind. This house is on fire. Cinnamon roll. I'm gonna die. Decaf is a disgrace. Skyrim dude. I am heavily concerned. Sparkles fawn sparkles. By disaster human. Explain. Do you need me to shank someone? The replies flooded in, most of them worried, asking why he was going to die, while a few offered to help in more drastic ways. In hindsight, that probably wasn't the best way to start, but it got the point across. Izuku curled up as he typed his response, hoping to find out what was happening to him. Izuku was standing after calling Skyrim dude, whose real name was Quinn, who was going to help him understand what was happening. He quietly stepped into the corridor to get to the bathroom. It was 2:26 a.m., so no one should be awake right now, but better safe than sorry. Quinn's call connected just as Izuku closed the bathroom door behind him. Hello? Quinn asked, wanting to confirm the call was connected. It's Izuku. They had exchanged real names a few months after they met when Izuku had a really bad day and needed someone to talk to. Quinn was the only one who wasn't emotionally distant online, so that was that. How are you feeling, kid? Quinn's deep voice came through the phone like a soothing melody. Izuku never understood how he could do that, but he was grateful for it. Confused, scared, and on the brink of tears, Izuku replied, his voice cracking halfway through. They them. Now, you said you were going to the bathroom. Are you in there? Feeling around on the wall, he searched for the light switch. He knew he could see well in the dark now, but the darkness might be causing him to hallucinate. When he found the light switch, he quickly turned it on but regretted it immediately as the bright light hurt his eyes. He let out that unsettling hiss again in pain, worrying Quinn. You all right there, Izuku? He nodded before realizing Quinn couldn't see that. I'm fine, I think. I'm also in the bathroom. He heard a quiet confirmation from his friend before continuing. Do you know what's happening? This hasn't happened before. I don't know of any diseases that could do this. A hallucinogenic quirk is still an option, but I didn't see anyone new with Izumi. It could also be that someone from that alley drugged me and... I'm gonna stop you right there. I don't know exactly what's happening to you, but I'm here with you to try and figure it out. Do you feel comfortable sending a picture of yourself to me? So we can see if there's really something wrong with your sight. Izuku hesitated. Showing pictures of himself to people he didn't know well wasn't a good idea, but he had known Quinn for a little less than a year now. He went to the mirror with his phone in hand, wanting to see what he might be hallucinating. His skin had turned a light gray with dark gray freckles, and his forest green eyes had transformed into a bright, almost radioactive green. Opening his mouth, he discovered his canines had grown longer, and his tongue was also longer, splitting into two parts at the end. It looked like the inside of his mouth was perhaps a bit darker than usual, but maybe he was imagining it. Quinn spoke after hearing a bit of shuffling on Izuku's end. If you'd feel more comfortable, we could go into a video call so you can see me too. They were just trying to calm Izuku and themselves down. Frankly, they had no idea what they were doing. All they knew was that Izuku had called them at what should have been 2 in the morning for him, panicking that his skin was turning gray. Once they got a confirming hum from him, They ended the call and started the other one. This was Izuku's first time seeing his friend's face. Quinn looked like a giant black humanoid lizard with bright blue eyes. If Izuku saw them at night, he might have been terrified. "Can you see me?" Izuku nodded, now sure that Quinn could see him. They hummed in response before continuing. "Okay, I can see the whole skin turning gray part. There anything else that has physically changed about you today?" He nodded before turning his phone so they could have a better view of him. "My teeth and tongue are longer, does that count?" Izuku came closer to the mirror and opened his mouth a little, hoping to show them. "Yes, kid, that counts. Could you open your mouth a little wider so I can see better?" He did as they asked, opening his mouth further. "That definitely isn't normal." Izuku tried opening his mouth even wider, but his jaw unhinged, revealing a second row of small teeth while the first one grew sharper. He dropped his phone with a startled yell and fell to the ground. He could faintly hear Quinn panicking and asking if he was okay, but all he could think about was his jaw unhinged like some grotesque monster. Izuku slapped his cheeks, wincing at the pain from the slits that had formed on his skin, trying to shake off that mindset. He could be self-deprecating later, now was not the time. Crawling to his phone, he picked it up with his hands, which thankfully looked normal, and held it to his face. "Are you all right? Do you need an ambulance?" Quinn's voice was filled with concern, rambling about the amount of blood on his face. It took him a few minutes to calm them down. "Kid, you didn't answer my question. Are you all right?" Quinn asked again. That was a question he could answer. "No. You're the one who was supposed to help me be all right." Izuku was starting to panic even more as his voice sounded distorted, even to himself. Did something unusual happen before you passed out? Was there something you didn't mention yet?" He thought back to the alley and the snakes that should be in his room. He should probably mention those. "When I was in the alley, my concussion got worse when a snake came up to me. When I woke up in my room, I saw the same snake with two more behind it on the floor of my bed." A thought crossed Izuku's mind, but he quickly dismissed it. It was way too late for that. It couldn't happen. Unfortunately, Quinn came to the same conclusion. "Did any of your relatives have a quirk related to snakes?" It was a valid question, but he knew what was implied. "I don't really know much about my family besides my parents and sister. So maybe." Then again, it wasn't all that rare for some quirks to mutate and be completely different, but that couldn't be what was happening. He couldn't get a quirk now. He crossed that bridge 6 years ago. He was quirkless. Quinn saw his concerned face and decided to ask his next, probably sensitive, question calmly and cautiously. "Izuku, have you heard about late bloomers before? All that pain and suffering couldn't be for nothing." A panicked Quinn and Izuku talked for an hour afterward, neither of them having any idea what would be happening to the younger one of the two. The multiple websites they read through basically said that each quirk worked differently, though some of them had aspects of their parents' quirks, and the best way to know what was happening was to visit a quirkologist. This was something he couldn't do, as he didn't want his parents to find out. He didn't want them to suddenly start caring about him again after they found out he did have a quirk. It hurt to admit it, but they didn't care. Not anymore. After saying his goodbyes to Quinn, Izuku looked around the kitchen. He knew he wasn't exactly quiet, so making sure no one was looking for him was a good idea. Seeing that there was nobody in the corridor, he went to the kitchen. There were more than a few tears shed, and he was pretty thirsty now. As he was drinking his glass of water, he noticed a note on the counter. He set his glass down when it was empty and grabbed the note. "Hi Izuku. Me, your father, Izumi, and her friends are going to the hero convention in America. Izumi seemed to be getting really stressed lately. We knew you didn't really like heroes all that much anymore, so we didn't buy you a ticket. Toshinori made sure that there was enough money in your account for food and all your other necessities. There's no need to be worried about school either. We planned this trip to be able to relax, and it wouldn't be fair if you couldn't do that too. Considering that we will be away for 2.5 weeks, you have the same time off school. Just be careful when you go outside, sweetheart. With Izumi not there to protect you, who knows what will happen. See you soon." He couldn't believe it. If he still had that glass in his hands, he would have dropped it. They just left him? Without warning, they decided to fly out to HeroCon and have a vacation. And what was this about him not liking heroes anymore? The only reason he stopped mumbling was because Katsuki had put him in his place. He didn't have any merchandise in his room because Izumi had taken it all. She didn't even keep it in her room but threw it out. Ignoring the insulting things in the note, he realized he had 2.5 weeks of peace. He also knew that his parents were well off and had a habit of overspending, so he would have more than enough money to burn. He doubted they were running an ordinary business. They were always vague about it, but it couldn't be anything illegal. They were far too naive for that. Returning to his bedroom in a sour mood, he paused in front of his closed door. Quinn and he shared the same thoughts about his appearance, so would the snakes be real too? Bracing himself, he cracked the door open, only to immediately close it when he saw 3 pairs of golden eyes staring back at him. He decided to sleep on the couch that night. Izuku woke up groaning. Sleeping on the couch hadn't done his back any favors. Sitting up, he remembered why he had chosen the couch over his perfectly fine bed. How would he even deal with the snakes? Okay, first course of action, look it up on the internet. Reaching over to the coffee table where his phone was, he felt his back pain intensifying. Now that he thought about it, why hadn't he just slept in the guest room? It would have made his morning much more pleasant. Googling what to do when a snake follows you home actually helped. The website advised making a clear path for the snake to exit and, if necessary, using a broom to guide it along. It also suggested calling a professional, but he decided that could wait. Izuku moved the couch and chairs around to create a wide path leading to the front door. Grabbing a broom, he approached the door and took a moment to calm himself. But after realizing that snakes could bite, he went to Izumi's room and grabbed her pillows. Armed with a broom and pillows tied to his limbs, he opened the door. The moment he opened the door, multiple eyes turned toward him. Instead of the 3 pairs of golden eyes he expected, there were dozens of eyes in all colors looking back at him. Izuku quickly pressed himself against the wall opposite the door and positioned the broom in front of him. It felt like the snakes multiplied every time he looked away. Cautiously, 2 of the largest snakes approached him. One he recognized from the alley, and the other resembled a reticulated python straight out of a zoo. As they came closer, Izuku gripped the broom tighter and tried to swat them away. Forget what the website said. That creature could easily overpower him. There was no point in trying to appear non-threatening. The snake was twice his size. Izuku winced as the broom cracked, a splinter digging into his palm. The snakes halted at the sound, not moving an inch. It was a stalemate for a few seconds, neither side daring to advance. Then a smaller snake with white scales and red eyes slithered between the 2 larger ones and closer to him. This was strange. While Izuku hadn't researched snake behavior, he was pretty sure snakes weren't pack animals. If they were, he would have heard of it after all. A group of 30 snakes ganging up on someone sounded terrifying. Once the small snake was about half a foot away, it stopped. Izuku's confusion grew until he felt a slight tugging inside his skull. Not wanting to stick around to figure out what that was, he bolted, jumping over the couch. However, his lack of athleticism caught up with him, and he lost his balance, falling shoulder first onto the floor. Groaning, he got up and turned to see if he could use the couch as a barricade. The snakes were following him. The 3 that seemed to lead the group were nowhere in sight, but the other snakes slithering toward him were just as concerning. Standing up, he quickly backed away and jumped onto the coffee table to get some distance. Unfortunately, the table wasn't very high, so it didn't provide much safety. As the snakes surrounded him, Izuku's panic escalated. The situation worsened when some of the snakes attempted to climb onto the table. When one grazed his ankle, he let out a startled yelp, reminding him that the snakes had stopped moving when he made those noises. He felt that tugging sensation in his skull again, stronger this time, and looked around to find the white snake that seemed to be the source of it. Spotting it, he threw caution to the wind and tried to unhinge his jaw once more. Now that he was actively trying to do it, his skin felt like it was being torn apart. Not knowing what sound he should make, Izuku screamed as loudly as he could. Instead of a high-pitched cry typical of a young child, an incredibly loud screech erupted from his mouth, shattering the nearby windows. Izuku was once again disturbed and frightened by his own abilities. though he thought he would have to get used to it eventually. But all that mattered was that the snakes had backed away a fair distance, giving him some breathing room. It turned into another stalemate, this one stretching on silently for roughly 2 minutes. Once again, it was the small albino snake that approached him, moving much slower this time. When it was a foot away, it focused on a specific snake, a dark blue one with black eyes, and the two engaged in a silent staring contest. After a few seconds, the blue snake cautiously slithered toward the albino, nudging its head against the smaller snake's body. Faint white lines between the blue snake's scales glowed, and before Izuku could snap out of his stupor, he felt a strong tugging sensation return. This time, it was much more intense. He held his head and winced in discomfort, some of the snakes moving backward while most remained rooted in place. His legs began to feel unsteady from the pain, and he started to feel lightheaded. Just before he lost consciousness, it felt as if whatever was pulling at his mind had torn something away. The pain ceased immediately, and before Izuku could process what was happening, he heard a woman's voice. Although he couldn't make out what she was saying, he was unsettled by the fact that it came from inside his head. The voice spoke again, louder this time. "Greetings, my lord." The woman's tone was both frightened and regal at the same time. Izuku was even more confused now. Lord? No, she must be talking about someone else. But the albino snake kept looking at him. Wait, how did he know that the snake was the one speaking to him? Quirked animals were incredibly rare, and even if they had a quirk, it was usually something that helped them survive, like faster healing, camouflage, or enhanced strength and speed. A telepathic snake would have likely been eliminated quickly, as the instinctive reaction would be to use one's quirk for survival. Sensing his confusion and realizing that if she didn't clarify soon, this conversation could take a turn for the worse, she spoke again. "May I explain this to you, my lord?" Izuku snapped out of his trance and made direct eye contact with the snake. A chill ran down the spines of all the snakes as his pupils shifted from round to reptilian slits. He was concentrating, trying to probe the invisible connection that felt uncomfortably attached to his mind, unaware that his quirk was affecting all the snakes in the room. As the silence stretched on, the albino snake grew anxious. She needed him to accept her offer, as her own survival depended on it. Making his decision, Izuku nodded for her to continue. He had no reason to refuse, and the more information he gathered about his new quirk, the better. The snake, now much less tense, began to explain. First, she clarified why they were all there. Each snake in the room had a quirk, but 4 of them immediately piqued Izuku's interest. The others could be analyzed later. The giant reticulated python had a quirk he mentally dubbed Berserker, which allowed him to enter a state where his physical abilities increased tenfold and his size tripled, though it only lasted 5 minutes. Apparently, he had come from a zoo. Izuku found it concerning that none of the vets had noticed his quirk, but he brushed it off. The second snake, the one who had found him in the alley, possessed a size manipulation quirk that allowed her to shrink or enlarge anything she touched for the next 24 hours. The downside was that the person she used her quirk on needed to remain within a 20-meter radius for it to last. He aptly named it Size Change. The third snake's quirk was currently in action. He was essentially a quirk enhancer. He could amplify anyone's quirk as long as he could physically touch them for more than 3 seconds. The downsides included needing to close his eyes to activate it, using up his stamina, having to remain still, and losing effectiveness if he broke concentration. Despite the requirements, the potential applications of this quirk were nearly limitless. Izuku quickly set aside his theories, named the quirk Boost, and moved on. The final one he was interested in was the albino snake. She explained that her quirk was a blend of her parents' abilities, allowing her to multitask easily and use invisible strings to connect with people's emotions. She wasn't strong enough for telepathy on her own, which was why she relied on the enhancer's quirk. Izuku was practically buzzing with excitement. Each quirk was incredibly unique with vast potential. "Pardon me, my lord. As flattered as we all are that you find us exciting, I would like to continue my explanation." Izuku blushed and shook his head. He could geek out about quirks later. Right now, he needed more information about his own. He would have to get used to the idea of having a quirk soon. It turned out that when the first snake found him, she felt an irresistible urge to approach him. She had stared at his unconscious body for a good 15 minutes before seeking out the albino snake to ask if she had any idea who he was. Both snakes returned to him in the alley and inspected him. The first snake also felt a strange compulsion to stay by his side, so they decided to follow their instincts and bring him to where they assumed he lived. Luckily, they guessed correctly. Then the albino snake went out to find another snake, a Japanese wood snake with a quirk that revealed what abilities people had. Why hadn't she mentioned this sooner? That quirk had so many possibilities it nearly made him faint. But he held it together because she was finally getting to the part where she'd explain what his quirk actually was. He knew he should take everything she said with a grain of salt, considering he had only known her for 10 minutes. However, trying to hide a quirk from his family that physically altered him would be a nightmare, so he'd need all the help he could get, even if it was from a telepathic snake. She explained that while his quirk did change his appearance and even affected his organs, though she skimmed over that part, which felt suspicious, it wasn't the only thing his quirk did. To summarize her explanation, which was a bit convoluted, Izuku could harvest massive amounts of energy from everything around him. Nobody would ever sense it because the amount taken was so small, but within a 36-mile radius, he was drawing tiny bits of energy from everything. The catch was that while he had this ability, he normally wouldn't be able to activate it. The reason was that he needed a certain amount of energy for the transformation to occur, an amount typically reached at 87 years of age. Although the energy he passively absorbed was immense, it still wasn't enough to trigger it. However, there was a way for him to gather much more energy than usual through stress. The more stressful a situation was, the more energy he absorbed. Normally, this would make those around him feel more tired and less angry, but apparently, Katsuki's rage was unyielding. So, it was more of a self-defense mechanism than anything else. She further explained that while he had this vast reservoir of energy, he would never be able to use it. But the snakes could. Apparently, he was a giant energy source, and the snakes fed off him because quirks now operated on a first-come, first-served basis. It was clear that Izuku wasn't pleased about this. Noticing his expression, the albino snake offered something in return. With some investigation, she had learned that Izuku wanted to be a hero to help people. And you didn't need to be a pro to do that, did you? In return, we shall help you connect with those who fall through the cracks. He understood what she meant by that. The ones who fell through the cracks were people who could have been amazing heroes but gave up because their quirk wasn't heroic enough. People who looked different due to a mutation and weren't chosen for jobs, forcing them to steal to put food on the table. Those with villainous quirks who decided that since everyone thought they were villains, they might as well act the part. Individuals with powerful quirks, but whose family situations were so dire that they chose to run away. Many of them ended up kidnapped and sold to fighting rings or worse. There were also those who had suffered discrimination for so long that they took their own lives. Quirkless kids who were told they were useless, always haunted by the statistic of a 70% death rate for quirkless individuals under the quirkless, treated as if they were a completely different species compared to those with quirks. Izuku shook his head rapidly. He couldn't do that. It was vigilantism and illegal quirk use. That wasn't legal and definitely not what a hero would do. He turned to the albino snake, who was nervously watching him. I can't, it's not what a hero would do. She fell silent for a moment, and the other snakes began to look anxious too. After a minute of quiet, she spoke again, but this time cautiously. Just like the heroes who beat you every day? The room seemed to chill. She knew she was touching a sensitive nerve, but this needed to be said. Quirked animals were always more intelligent than others of their species, and they all understood the consequences of being discovered. It didn't help that she stood out with her pale scales and bright red eyes. They all had a chance to avoid being hunted by human scientists if this boy agreed. His power could supercharge them and help them remain hidden more easily. Even if they were caught, there would be enough physical enhancers to help the others escape. Now, if only the child would agree. While the albino snake quietly observed Izuku, he was deep in thought. Katsuki and his friends had incredibly strong quirks. They would undoubtedly make it into UA. But if they were going to be the new generation of heroes, did he really want to stand alongside them? He didn't. Being a hero was about saving people, yet they did nothing but torment him and his classmates with weak or unheroic quirks. Thankfully, there wasn't anyone in his school with a villainous quirk. They would probably have it even worse. But that only reinforced his point. He didn't want to be a pro-hero and watch his tormentors thrive without consequences. While he lacked the power to stop them, he wouldn't be a bystander. He would step away into the shadows and not pursue a career as a pro-hero. But he would still be a hero. Because heroes save people, and that was what he intended to do. He steeled his resolve and nodded at the albino snake. Izuku would be a hero. After Izuku agreed to essentially be the snake's power source, he began analyzing them. He needed to understand the potential dangers in various situations, such as a hero arriving, someone getting frightened and using their quirk against them, instances of animal cruelty, the zoo where the berserker had escaped trying to charge him with animal theft, natural disasters, hostile reactions when they approached, getting caught in a villain attack, injuries, or being pursued by scientists. He should really shift his focus. The group analyzed and improved each other for about a week before a thought struck Izuku. He could help people's mental states, but if they didn't trust him enough to visit a physical location, what could he do? It wasn't likely that those with trust issues would just follow some random snakes around. He needed to find a way to communicate through the internet. But he didn't know how to do that. The larger issue was that he knew someone who could help, but he was afraid to ask. It was one of his friends on the server, Discrimesabitch, or Discrim for short. They preferred being behind a screen and had started a career in programming, which was something they enjoyed. Izuku knew that Discrim had created a few games, and he personally found it fun to test them. However, what he was considering would still be illegal, even if Discrim was doing it from another country. He would likely face serious repercussions if caught. That was why he hesitated. But sometimes, to help others, you had to take risks. All Might had even said that in an interview, so it had to be true. Grabbing his phone from beneath a sleeping snake, his apartment was filled with them, he opened a private chat. Discrim, can I ask you a potentially illegal and immoral question? Discrimesabitch, sure, those are always the fun ones. Cinnamon Roll, you do realize how that sounds, right? Discrimesabitch, who cares? Now on with the question. Cinnamon Roll, so, if someone needed a place to be a hub for something illegal, but for a good reason, would you make one? Discrimesabitch, I'll need to know the specifics first, then I'll decide. Izuku hadn't thought of that, though he really should have. What did he want the hub to do? After a few minutes of careful consideration, he answered. Cinnamon Roll, like being able to talk in smaller chat rooms, similar to the platform we met on. Maybe profiles for pronouns, nicknames, and potential services they could offer. Of course, there would also be an option to ask for help of any kind. Discrimesabitch, you've got a pretty good idea, but it'll take about 2 or 3 months to create. Can I ask where this came from, though? You don't have to answer if it makes you uncomfortable. Cinnamon Roll, this wasn't my idea. I was just curious. Discriminate, sure. But I want to know how illegal this is going to get. You're quite young, and I don't want a barely older than a toddler running around causing chaos. Cinnamon Roll, first off, I'm 10. Second of all, I just want to help people. You guys made me so much happier, so I thought it would be the same for others. The two of them discussed how it would work, how he wanted it to look, and that he would need to tell him what to write down because he didn't know Japanese very well. He only knew a few words from anime. Izuku's stomach growled by the end of the conversation. It was an hour past his usual dinner time, so it wasn't surprising. He got off the couch and headed for the kitchen, gently shooing away the snakes that had curled up on the counters and under the equipment. He started searching for a katsudon recipe on his phone. His parents were neglectful, but at least they provided him with food and an allowance, so he didn't really know how to cook. It was a bit depressing how low his standards were for them. After making a barely decent dinner, maybe he should learn to cook in case his parents stopped feeding him. He headed to his room and looked around. He should have enough money for some new furniture. Thankfully, the snakes could feed off his energy, so he didn't have to worry about getting them food, but he still needed a place to hide them. It wasn't like his parents came into his room anyway, so hiding them in cabinets and under other things should work. Though he was sad about having to get rid of some of his hero merchandise, they were common pieces of his collection. He planned out which furniture to get from the stores with the help of their websites, but he intended to buy everything in person and with cash since his parents could probably see what he had purchased. Though he doubted they'd pay that much attention to him. Flopping down on his bed, he put his phone on the charger and tried to fall asleep. Later, some of the snakes joined him, curling up against him because his body was much warmer now after his transformation, which didn't make sense since he should be more snake-like. He stared at his now gray hands. He had already double-checked with the albino snake that he couldn't revert back to his previous appearance. According to her, he actually had an even more monstrous form, but because he hadn't accepted that he had a quirk yet, he couldn't use it. The best course of action would probably be to use makeup to make him look normal and gradually lighten his skin to gray. It would look more natural, and people wouldn't question it as much. That questioning often led to him being hurt more than usual for trying to look down on Katsuki. He couldn't imagine seeing him as Kaken anymore. His Kaken was his brother in all but blood. Katsuki was, as coconuts like to call him, a bit of a fool with his head so far up his own ego that he seemed to have lost his common sense. Smiling to himself about the multiple memories, actually of coconuts cursing the blonde out for being quirkist, he chuckled. It would be absolute chaos if they ever met. If it wasn't a physical fight, which Katsuki wouldn't risk in public, it would definitely turn into a swearing contest. Considering that Katsuki had been repeating the same "you're a useless Deku because you're quirkless" line like a broken record for the past 6 years, he'd definitely lose. Izuku giggled as he imagined the 20-year-old cursing out a kid half her age. The snakes looked at him curiously, but he didn't mind. In a happy mood, he fell asleep. After admitting that he had a quirk and explaining how it worked, he and DISCONTINUED decided to call their hub the Serpent's Nest. They put a lot of thought into it, wanting it to be recognizable and not something anyone could claim as their own work. He found it a bit embarrassing but didn't fight it since many people probably wouldn't even use it. Thankfully, his family didn't notice anything different. Sending his snakes out actually did a lot more good than he thought it would. People were surprisingly willing to sign into a server that might be full of villains. There were even a few people offering to fake documents for a reasonable fee. There were so many people joining the server with various skills that he had to ask DISCONTINUED to add icons to identify what they did. For ease, DISCONTINUED also created a list of names for those searching for specific help. While making the cheat sheet, they also noted his account as the Nest's owner. However, that led to the most stressful situation he had faced in years: picking a name. He was used to the dry and repetitive insults from both Katsuki and Izumi. Even the beatings didn't hurt as much. But choosing what people would call him in a professional setting? He wasn't prepared. Searching through mythology about snakes, he eventually decided on Jormungandr, the serpent so large that it wrapped itself around Asgard. The name spread quickly both in and out of the server, to the point where people at his school were talking about him. Thank goodness DISCONTINUED made it so that a specific code was needed to enter, otherwise his bullies would have come in and ruined it for everyone. But now was not the time to dwell on that. This was possibly the most foolish yet important thing he would ever do. He was about to make a physical appearance as Jormungandr. There was a man trying to escape his abusive wife with his 2 sons, and he had begged for anyone willing to distract her long enough for him to change his identity and flee to Australia. The reason he couldn't file for divorce? According to many articles that had somehow never made it to the news, the chances of a husband gaining custody in an abusive situation were incredibly slim. The courts often overlooked evidence in abuse cases, making it even more difficult for him. On the husband, noticing that no one had agreed, he accepted. It would have been more convenient if he had access to that other form of his that the albino snake, now called Ivory, had mentioned. But for some reason he still couldn't use it. After some online searching, he found a plain mask that covered his entire face, leaving holes for his eyes. That, along with the cloak he made with Gina's help, prepared him for his decision to embrace vigilantism. He was ready to go. Wrapping multiple snakes around him, he sneaked out of his window. The quirks of the snakes he brought with him included the ability to manipulate shadows, which would help cover 2 people, a communication aid named Ivory, a quirk that could enhance others, dubbed Roid by coconuts, a fear-inducing presence that he hoped to amplify with the enhancer, the ability to cause small electrical outages for up to 5 minutes, and one that could manipulate the size of people, which Bai had called Shro. So he was completely decked out in his gear. He didn't want to call them subordinates, but partners in crime felt more fitting. Slowly, he made his way toward his client's location, using shadows to cloak himself a block away from where he needed to be. He avoided all the street cameras that he and the snakes could spot. When he was about 100 feet away from the location, he saw the family he was going to help. The father and his 2 sons looked anxious as they waited, their bags already packed. Approaching them from behind, he spoke in a distorted voice. "Where do I need to go?" He had learned from Hobbit that an effective intimidation technique was to state questions as orders. Considering he was trying to pass off as an adult who knew what he was doing, he needed all the intimidation he could muster. The family flinched and quickly turned around, the father stepping protectively in front of his children. "Are you Jay Jormungandr?" the tall man stammered, visibly nervous. From his perspective, there were only a pair of toxic green reptilian eyes high up in a black void too dark to be a shadow. He wouldn't have been as scared if he knew it was just Izuku standing on a dumpster to appear taller. "Yes, now where do I need to be?" Izuku replied. He already had a physical description of the wife and knew her quirk. She was a fairly muscular woman with fair skin, mid-length light curly blue hair, dark pink eyes, and freckles, with a piercing in her lip on the left side. Her quirk was minor telekinesis, allowing her to move small objects within a 20-foot radius, as long as she knew what they looked like. Thankfully, she worked as a hotel secretary, so she probably wouldn't think to use her quirk against him. The man straightened himself, though still cautious, and pointed down the street. "My house, former house after today hopefully, is the 7th down the road. Mirasi should be coming home in about 10 minutes. I have the keys if you want them." He hesitantly held out a single key in his palm, unsure if the shadowy figure would take it. Izuku considered it. Getting in without any signs of breaking and entering would make it look less suspicious to the wife and catch her off guard. But before he made a decision, he quickly sent a message through the mental link with Ivory. With her constant use of her quirk and his boundless energy, she had figured out how to allow him to ask questions through the link, though they couldn't be very long without causing quirk exhaustion. "Can my hand be shrouded in shadows if I take it?" he asked, hoping for a quick answer as the man in front of him grew even more nervous. His children looked like they might burst into tears at any moment. "Yes, he can pull it off," came the answer from his trusted companion. He tilted his head to the left and smiled in a way that made his eyes appear more predatory. Spending time with snakes and those experienced in intimidation had its effects. The man shuddered, and his children hid behind his legs in fear. Izuku felt bad for the poor kids, but they would be better off being scared of him. Admiring a criminal wouldn't paint a good picture for their peers. Slowly, he reached out his hand, which appeared gigantic compared to his usual size, covered in a black fog that looked like a void. The father flinched when Izuku's hand brushed against his while grabbing the key. It felt cold. Izuku retracted his hand and spoke again. "Then I believe you can go on your way. I will handle the rest." His calm voice belied the turmoil he felt inside. The family quickly scampered off, and he watched them leave, only turning to walk toward the home when they turned a corner. When he reached the house, he hesitated. He was really going to do this, wasn't he? He'd be a criminal after this, not a villain. Those were people who only acted for their own gain, but someone who broke the law. Steeling himself, he entered the house and hid in the kitchen. This would be his first appearance after starting the Serpents' nest 2 years ago, and he intended to make it a memorable one. Mirasi Tanyaboni was an average woman. She had 2 smart and kind kids, a loving husband, and a stable job. Or so most would say after meeting her. She thought differently. Mirasi couldn't bear being in such a mundane job as a hotel secretary. She didn't have a weak and ordinary quirk like her coworkers. Who would want a quirk that could make the earth move slower? It's completely useless. At least she had a useful quirk. It may not be hero material, but she could do much more than some nobodies. Like her husband. She knew she liked him when she heard that he had a quirk that could paralyze people he touched. They would have made a great hero duo. But the wimp didn't want to be a hero, he wanted to be a journalist. He could have been so much more but settled for mediocre. But that didn't matter now. They had children and were married. While her oldest son of 6 was a disappointment, a quirk mutation made him immune to paralysis, her younger son of 4 was not. 2 weeks ago, he got his quirk, allowing him to paralyze people at a distance. A perfect heroic quirk. Though it was a shame he inherited his father's timid personality, crying over losing friends who thought he had a villain's quirk. He'd get over it, they were probably nobodies anyway. What irritated her most, though, was her husband. The man had the audacity to try to stop her from training their son. Her son was the perfect hero material she was looking for, and that spineless man thought he could waltz in and get her to do what he wanted? She made sure he wouldn't think of that again. Now everything was back to normal, and she was in a pretty good mood when she came home. Her manager even offered her a promotion. When she arrived, she called out to her family. "I'm home." Marasi didn't get a response. Her husband had started avoiding her after his outburst, and her kids were probably asleep. Dropping her bag on the kitchen counter, she didn't notice the pair of toxic green eyes staring at her and went to her kid's room to check on him. Opening the door, she found that he wasn't there, and all his things were gone too. She knew what was happening, and it made her furious. Marasi thought her son had kicked that habit. Sleeping with his father was not something he should be doing. Stomping over to the guest room, where her husband was sleeping since his outburst, she threw the door open, ready to scream at her disobedient child. But nobody was there, and neither was any of her husband's belongings. Marasi was a smart woman, so she quickly connected the dots, and it made her see red. The JRK ran off with her kid. She couldn't take this lying down. Finding the coward and her son was her first priority. Storming down the stairs, she went into the kitchen and grabbed her bag but froze shortly after. This time she noticed the eyes. Still running on adrenaline and the rage of betrayal, she started to shout at it. "Who in the world are you?" She used her quirk to float 4 knives toward it, holding it at knife point. The figure stayed silent for a few seconds before addressing her. "I don't believe that to be any of your concern, Mrs. Tanyaboni." The creature spoke in a nightmarish and distorted voice, and it didn't help that it knew her name. There was only one reasonable conclusion. The coward hired this guy to get rid of her. But bad luck for him, she'd spent years of her childhood training to be a hero before giving up, and she could hold her own in a fight. Floating the knives closer to the man who was trying to intimidate her, she mocked him, knowing he underestimated her. "Either tell me where my husband is, or I'll turn you into a pincushion." While she couldn't see the man's body, she could see the emotions swirling in his eyes. There was fear in there. Marasi smirked, knowing she was much better than some thug with a shadow manipulation quirk. They were in a stalemate for a few seconds before something else happened. The temperature dropped multiple degrees, and a shudder ran up her spine as the person's eyes narrowed. "You genuinely think he sent me here? I thought you were smarter than this." "Seems I was wrong, wasn't I?" The creature snarled as Marasi began to feel that something was wrong. At the next spike of fear, she moved all the knives under her control at the man, not fully comprehending what she was doing. The radioactive green eyes grew wide as all the knives struck him with a sickening sound. Marasi backed away in horror, realizing that she had just seriously hurt someone. He wasn't falling to the ground, so the knives probably pinned him to the wall. She began to feel sick at the thought. She had actually harmed someone. But that was because of the fear enveloping her. She thought the guy's quirk was shadow manipulation. Where did that feeling come from? While Marasi was trying to rationalize what had just happened, she was interrupted by the sound of metal clattering to the floor. Looking up, she finally saw what she had tried to attack. It was a giant creature, roughly 9 feet tall, bending over to fit in the small kitchen, with some kind of skull with long, sharp fangs as its head. Dark red and purplish horns protruded from the back, and 2 sets of what looked like twisted ram horns came from the same place. It had a scaly dark gray neck that transformed into a thick coat of unruly dark green fur, but all that fur still couldn't hide the fact that the creature was built like a tank. Its forearms weren't covered in fur but were a lighter grit. That was until it transformed into pitch-black claws resembling those of a sloth. The creature's haunches were covered in dark scales, reminiscent of an ancient dragon. The last thing she noticed was its tail, matching the color of its horns but appearing even more reptilian and possibly larger than the creature itself. Mirasi was frozen in fear. This wasn't just a thug hired to intimidate her. This was a monster. She couldn't even back away as the creature locked eyes with her. Then the fear returned, stronger than before. The last thought that crossed her mind as the creature approached was that this was how her story would end. And then she fainted. Izuku was bewildered by the unfolding events. Initially, he was frightened by Mirasi, which was a reasonable reaction when someone was in danger. He had asked the snake with the fear quirk to gradually intensify it, hoping she would be too distracted to focus on her abilities. But then he felt a sharp pain. It felt as if he were burning. He couldn't scream, frozen in place as everything began to go numb. Then he felt his skin stretching, burning, itching, and breaking while he became a mere spectator in his own mind. It was reminiscent of that alley 2 years ago when he first discovered his quirk. Was he really that close to death back then? Before he could ponder further, his bones began to ache and bend, particularly his legs. He opened his mouth in a silent scream as he felt his knees snap backward, only to heal immediately after. Izuku's clothes ripped as his body transformed. His toes felt crushed in his boots as they melded together, unable to break free from their confines. He couldn't form coherent thoughts as he sensed his spine elongating and something akin to a tail beginning to form, while his head started to morph as well. Even with his eyes shut, he knew his nose and mouth were stretching into a snout, and the pain from his teeth elongating beyond his lips was overwhelming. Izuku couldn't concentrate on what was happening anymore. It was all too much. The snakes fell away as he grew taller, his nails turning into claws. Something was happening to his cheeks. He felt as if another limb was sprouting from his back. His legs felt weak, and his head throbbed intensely. Before he realized it, the pain vanished in an instant, but he remembered something crucial. The woman was still in front of him. She had witnessed whatever transformation this was. He opened his eyes to see, with enhanced vision, a terrified Mirasi. She looked ready to flee, but he couldn't let that happen. That family still needed more time. Mirasi froze, her eyes widening in fear as she began to tremble. Izuku wanted to approach her and somehow reassure her to stay put, though he knew he wouldn't actually follow through with any threats. He attempted to walk, but exhaustion and pain overwhelmed him, and he collapsed from his crouched position. Mirasi took that moment to faint, just as Izuku fell on top of her. He managed to catch himself on his hands, unsure if he would crush her beneath him. Panic surged through him. What was he supposed to do now? He had intended to intimidate her, not scare her into unconsciousness. His eyes met Ivory's, and he noticed the snakes were no longer coiled around him. They all looked at him with astonished expressions, but he couldn't comprehend why they were on their snouts. Ivory cautiously slithered closer, keeping her head lower than usual, almost as if she were afraid of him. She spoke in his mind, which she shouldn't have been able to do without Royd's help. "Could you turn that off? My lord." This was the first time she had ever seemed this nervous around him, even reverting to calling him her lord again, something she had stopped doing a month after they met. He responded in a panic, his voice deeper than usual. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know what's happening to me. Is this that second form you mentioned? Wasn't it supposed to be triggered by me accepting my quirk? I nearly died just now." He lowered his voice as he noticed Ivory trembling in fear. What was this other form doing to her? And how could he revert back? This couldn't be permanent. It was called a second form for a reason. He should be able to return to his previous state if he concentrated hard enough. Ivory interrupted his thoughts, bringing him back to the present. "You're currently using the fear quirk." "What?" It took him a moment to process that. They all knew he had a power source he couldn't control. But where had this come from? He could accept that his quirk was some strange mutation from a distant relative, but this felt excessive. He shook his head and focused back on Ivory. He could have a mental breakdown later. Right now, he needed to revert to being Izuku and get out of there. "How do I turn it off?" After some effort, they managed to return Izuku to his human form and deactivate the fear quirk. However, his human form now featured sharper nails, 2 sets of dark purplish-brownish red horns, and a long, slender tail of the same color. New problems arose. He was naked because his clothes had been torn during the transformation, his new features would be difficult to conceal, and he had unintentionally caused Mirasi more distress than he had intended. What had started as a threat had escalated to something that could leave her traumatized. The last problem was easier to solve. He simply found Mirasi's room and took some of her smaller clothes. They were still incredibly oversized, but better than being without anything. He walked back downstairs to her unconscious body, contemplating his next move. Eventually, he decided to drag her to an alleyway and place a bottle of alcohol in her hand. If people saw her, they'd think she was just a passed-out drunk, allowing the heroes who probably wouldn't care much to handle it. With the help of the shadow manipulation snake, he scouted out an empty alley and accidentally stumbled upon a man using drags. Why he chose to do that in an alley was none of Izuku's concern. He planned to leave the man alone, but Ivory interrupted him, saying, "I recognize that substance. It causes vivid hallucinations. I don't understand why humans keep using such things." That sparked an idea in him. After a while, the man fell to the ground, giggling to himself, and soon after, he was out cold. Izuku climbed down from the building and approached the man. Searching his pockets, he felt a surge of luck when he found another dose. Ivory let out a quiet gasp as she realized what he was planning. Having just seen how the man took the drag, Izuku had a good idea of how to administer it. The police wouldn't believe Mirasi if she still had a hallucinogenic substance in her system. And if he did something wrong, well, at least she wasn't the best person. He grabbed the empty and full syringes from the unconscious man, using the oversized sleeve of his clothing as a glove, as he wasn't about to touch anything like that with his bare hands. He jogged back to the house, putting in a lot of effort to drag Mirasi's unconscious body up the stairs. Finally, he managed to lay her down on her bed. He placed the empty syringe in the bathroom drawer, likely where a drag user would stash it, then took the full syringe and crawled on top of her. Taking her wrist, he slowly inserted the syringe and emptied it as best as he could, despite his shaking hands. Of course, he was nervous. He had just drugged someone. After removing the syringe, he placed it in her open hand and used a paper towel to wipe a bit of vomit off her face before heading downstairs to clean up the kitchen. As he looked at the knives, he noticed his blood had turned a translucent purple. Once everything was back in place except for the gloves, which he planned to dispose of elsewhere, he left. He would need to hire someone to edit the street cameras in the area. In hindsight, he hadn't used enough shadows to conceal himself. Izuku sighed as he climbed through his bedroom window and changed into his pajamas, texting his family that the job was done and receiving his payment. Next time, he promised himself he would be more prepared. The fact that the man had been there was a coincidence, and if he hadn't shown up, he would have been in serious trouble. He let out a wry laugh. Next time. He knew he wouldn't be able to sit still for long. Grabbing his phone, he opened the Serpents Nest app and looked for people within his price range as the snakes curled up beside him. Next time, he would make his plan flawless. The next 2 years were an emotional roller coaster for Izuku. In the end, he couldn't quite figure out what his second form meant. His quirk was called Conduit, but that didn't seem to fit anymore. He would have to think of a better name once he learned more. The day after his encounter, the entire Serpent's Nest was buzzing with excitement. Everyone believed that Jormungandr would send a henchman to do the job he had agreed to, not show up in person. This was significant because the leader wasn't just some faceless figure behind a computer. He was someone who could fight. It didn't help that word had spread that the police didn't believe Mirasi because she was under the influence of drags, while her husband made it clear to anyone who asked that she wasn't a junkie. This raised questions about what his quirk truly was. The only thing everyone was certain of was its power. As a result, many sought out Jormungandr if the situation became dire. There were also those who wanted him to join their gang or help them with robberies, but that was a different story. Or how they were caught by the police due to an anonymous tip-off. For those who genuinely needed help, he looked for anyone capable of assisting. Revealing himself was an absolute last resort. He only showed himself twice after the first time, and those instances were only after he had learned some basic fighting techniques. He couldn't improve much since he had no one to spar with, but it was a good start. The only option he could think of was vigilantism, but that seemed reckless. If he did that, the police and pro-heroes would be after him, and he had no confidence in his ability to escape them. However, that didn't stop him from experimenting with his second form. The first thing he did after learning to walk was focus on using the snake's quirks. He discovered that he could use multiple quirks at once, though it required more energy. Additionally, if he used a quirk, the snake it belonged to could still use it, but it would be weakened. When he was in his second form and not using their quirks, the snakes could utilize them at triple their normal power. With practice, those numbers only increased. He decided to call it his assault mode, which seemed fitting. It would have been easier for him if his second form wasn't already recognized as Jormungandr. Then he could use his normal form for self-defense classes. He already had more than enough allowance, and it wasn't like his family would notice if he came home later than usual. But alas, it was too late for that. There wasn't much time for pondering anyway. He needed to get to school. One of his snakes warned him as he dressed that today would be particularly challenging. He had a vague sensing quirk that worked somewhat like future sight, giving him strange feelings he couldn't quite pinpoint. The fact that he sensed today wouldn't be good put Izuku on edge. He helped Ivory, Shro, and a light yellow snake named Dandelion, who had a quirk called Antipresence that made it easier for him to blend in. They wrapped around his chest and tail as he prepared himself. It was still early, so he quickly made breakfast and planned to hang around the park for an hour and a half before school. Already feeling uneasy, he decided to whip up an omelet and then visit a cat cafe. There was a particular one with a quirked cat named Titan who wasn't afraid of him. The other cats usually ran off, likely sensing the presence of his snakes. Before heading out, he grabbed a pastel purple snake with a barrier quirk, had Shro shrink her, and let her wrap around his hair, using herself as a hair tie. This was the main reason he had grown his hair out, even visiting a salon to make it waist length, allowing for more intricate hairstyles that could accommodate more snakes. As he stepped outside, he couldn't shake the feeling that this would turn out to be one of the worst days of his life. The day began normally, there weren't more sneers than usual, and students attempted to trip him as they typically did. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, which only heightened his anxiety. Izuku was so lost in his thoughts that he jumped when the teacher shouted, "Of course, you're all aiming for the hero course." All the students began showcasing their quirks, leading Izuku to a concerning conclusion. Perhaps one of the quirks would misfire and cause chaos in the classroom. He was pulled from his thoughts again when Katsuki yelled, "Don't lump me in with these extras, teach." Katsumi quickly followed up, "They won't even make it." As D-listers' sidekicks. The entire class erupted in anger, hurling insults at one another. Izumi, supposedly the only one capable of making sensible decisions, tried to calm both blondes down. "Come on guys. They do great in any field, no matter their quirks." Izuku quietly scoffed to himself, unnoticed amidst the commotion of middle schoolers. When the bell rang, everyone rushed out of the classroom. The building hadn't collapsed during class. Maybe it would after school? Despite packing up quickly, the trio managed to corner him in the classroom. He seriously considered jumping out of one of the windows. There was a tree outside, and he was confident he could make it. But before he could decide, Katsuki sneered at him in his usual manner. "Still think you can be a hero, huh, Deku?" The blonde shoved him backward while continuing his tirade. "Stay out of our way." Izumi took that as her cue to grab his math homework and levitate it so Katsumi could obliterate it. Standing up, Izuku dusted himself off and reached for his bag. He had printed an extra copy of all his homework, so he wasn't too worried. As he turned his back on them, he didn't notice Katsuki's manic grin, which quickly shifted back to his usual scowl. "You know." Izuku turned back, thinking the blonde had finished speaking, but it seemed he had more to say. He felt uncomfortable as the manic grin returned. "If you really want to be a hero that badly, you should take a leap off the roof and hope for a better quirk in your next life." Izumi flinched, looking at her boyfriend in horror. They wanted her little brother safe, so why would he say something like that? Katsumi seemed to be the only one who found it amusing, while the rest of the class was caught up in the spectacle. But the worst part was seeing Izuku, who was already so fragile, and wondering what he was feeling. She didn't want to turn and look at him, She knew the blank expression he wore was a mask hiding his pain. All she could do was apologize and tell him that she needed to do this for his safety. Izumi approached her brother, expecting to see him on the verge of tears after hearing such a hurtful comment from his best friend. Instead, she found Izuku looking at them with a mix of disappointment, anger, and disgust. She was shocked. This was the first real expression she had seen on her little brother's face in 3 years. He must have thought they hurt him out of hatred. She needed to correct this misunderstanding. Walking past Katsuki with a look that said they would discuss this later, she solemnly approached her brother. Her heart ached as he put more distance between them when she tried to get closer. Was he scared of her? She could see through his facade easily, being siblings did that. But first, I think I should clarify some things, she began. Izuku looked at her with suspicion while her friends appeared confused about her intentions. I know it doesn't seem like it, but we're trying to protect you. You would only get hurt if you decided to become a hero. We couldn't let you waste your life like that, so we did this. The Bakugo twins looked down, ashamed. Their actions were meant to stop Izuku from pursuing his dream of becoming a hero, but their reasoning felt contradictory. Izuku trembled at her words, deeply moved and struggling to contain his emotions. I know what Katsuki said wasn't right, and what we've done isn't exactly good either. But you understand. There was simply no way to let you think that being a hero was an option. By the end of her impassioned speech, tears filled her eyes, but she felt a glimmer of hope that they could begin to mend their relationship. As she looked up, she noticed her brother had stopped trembling, though he still kept his head down. Relief washed over her as he began to speak. I think I know what could help you be better. He slowly approached her, and while she was puzzled by the idea of needing to be better, she already felt great in her own right. She was willing to listen. Izuku placed a hand on her shoulder, squeezing gently. Izumi gasped in surprise, feeling a sudden jolt of pain, which alerted her friends that something was amiss. Since when was he so strong? The Bakugas didn't intervene, assuming that a quirkless person couldn't do much harm anyway. Leaning closer, Izuku flashed a smile that was both unsettling and chilling as he spoke in a distorted voice. Why don't you take a leap off the roof and hope for a better life next time? The entire room froze as Izuku's expression twisted into a wide grin, revealing sharp teeth. However, he quickly regained his composure, returning to a more neutral expression and releasing Izumi. She fell to the floor in shock, staring at him in disbelief, struggling to comprehend the sudden shift. How the tables had turned. That was the same expression he wore when he had declared his desire to be a quirkless hero, only to have them turn their backs on him. None of them moved as he walked toward the door, pausing to deliver one final blow. I'll clarify something since you all seem oblivious. I haven't wanted to be a pro-hero since I was 12. He noticed Izumi's face light up with hope at his words, thinking she had succeeded in changing his mind. Good, if she had hope, he could shatter it. If I had to deal with people like you all the time, I'd lose my mind and eventually lash out. I've lost all admiration for heroes after witnessing what they can do firsthand for a decade. It's just not worth it. They flinched at his cold tone, as if he were discussing the weather. Seeing their horrified expressions, he decided to add one last note before leaving. Oh, one more thing. The trio tensed, fearing what he might reveal next. Izuku felt a painful shift in his bones as his nails elongated and darkened at the tips. With a deliberate motion, he removed his beanie, revealing curved horns that left his audience in shock. To top it off, he sent a message to Ivory to brace herself as his tail unfurled, swaying behind him. Smiling sweetly, he said in an airy voice, I've had a quirk since I was 10. This mission has been pointless for the past 4.5 years. With that, he skipped away, his tail wagging behind him. Izuku felt exhilarated. He had just stood up to his bullies, and their expressions were priceless. Shoka looked stunned when she saw him at the school entrance, having never seen his horns or tail before. When she attempted to speak, he snarled at her, disregarding any consequences. He felt amazing. She froze at the sound, her heart racing and her cheeks flushing. Though Izuku was oblivious to her reaction, he was too busy reveling in the thought that the trio would be reconsidering their life choices. Well, Izumi would. The Bakugas would likely only pretend to regret it for her sake. He doubted the blondes cared about him anymore, but that didn't matter. He had already given up on them. Hopefully, they would leave him alone now. Izuku skipped over to the cat cafe he had visited before school, called the White Dove for some reason. He found it amusing that cats typically ate doves, yet the name stuck. Entering the shop, he greeted the surprised barista, Shin, with a cheerful smile. People seemed shocked by his appearance today. It seemed that sudden quirk mutations could be quite the surprise. There was no line, so he approached Shin directly. "Look different today?" Izuku giggled at the bewildered expression on his friend's face. Shin, under the impression that Izuku worked for Jormungandr, didn't question the burns and bruises, but this was a whole new level of confusion. "Sorry I hid this from you, it was pretty confidential," he said apologetically, not entirely lying. The reason he had revealed all that information to his former friends wasn't purely impulsive. He hadn't planned for it to happen so soon. But he was determined to tell them before school ended so they could inform his parents, allowing him to transfer to a high school and escape the ongoing verbal and physical abuse linked to his new quirk registration. Shin simply nodded and prepared the teenager's usual order, wisely choosing not to inquire about the nature of that confidentiality. Izuku settled into his usual spot and pulled out his phone, scrolling through the Serpent's nest and sending a few messages. The first text was to his tech team, affectionately nicknamed the Second Hydra's Head. The name had been chosen because both Jormungandr and the Hydra are mythical reptiles, and they seemed to fit together quite nicely. By the time he had heard the name, it was too late to change it. Now, there were 8 teams named the Hydra's Head serving Jormungandr, a serpent from Norse mythology, alongside a creature from Greek mythology. The inaccuracy bothered him, but he let it slide. What he needed from his tech team was to hack into the cameras and monitor the trio he regrettably knew. He had received a message after leaving school from a classmate with a sensory quirk, indicating that while his quirk wasn't reacting as intensely, it was still acting up. Izuku felt relatively safe in the cafe, which was fortified with absurdly reinforced walls and glass. The only thing he could think of was that the trio might be planning something that could cause significant trouble for him. Once he received the confirmation he sought from his tech team, he messaged the 4th Hydra's Head, his communications team. They were individuals who owed him favors but couldn't repay him in cash and lacked skills that would be useful to the other teams. He had integrated them into the 4th Head, where they received requests and forwarded them to available helpers. This head was by far the largest, allowing him to manage multiple projects simultaneously. The current project of concern was the nest's expansion. After careful consideration and preparation, he dispatched several teams to McQueen and 3 others to explore opportunities to assist people in America. It required significant funding and the right connections, but if he could help others, it was worth it. According to the 4th Head, they were an hour away from their destination. Shin approached him and served his food and tea. He was never really a coffee person. Before he could finish chewing one of his cookies, his phone pinged. Glancing at his lock screen, he saw the message came from the 2nd Head's chat. Quickly, he shoved the rest of his cookie into his mouth and opened the link sent to him. The screen displayed the Now quartet walking down a suburban neighborhood. None of them looked well, but Katsuki appeared to be the worst, coughing persistently. Izuku didn't care much about their situation. The 2nd Head knew what mattered to him and what didn't, so as long as it didn't threaten the nest, he was indifferent to the 4 of them. Katsuki was complaining as usual when both Inko and Toshinori emerged from an alley. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Izumi asked, her voice weary, as if she had endured a long day. Neither of her parents seemed to notice her exhaustion and began their speech. "Izumi, it's time we tell you this. We've been holding back for too long, and you deserve to know." With a dramatic flourish, they transformed into their hero costumes, Toshinori inflating in the process. "Well, that was unexpected," Izuku mumbled to himself, wide-eyed as he watched the 4 teenagers fawn over the heroes on his phone. He knew that the 2 of them were more than just business partners. If they couldn't even notice their child's skin had turned gray, how could they avoid being deceived? He had even tasked the 2nd Head to investigate their situation, but they couldn't breach the firewall. All they could determine was that his parents were quite wealthy. Izuku watched intently as the conversation continued. Due to your heroic actions in saving Katsuki, we have both decided that you should inherit One for All. Viridian Tornado declared with grand gestures. All Might quickly explained what One for All was, leaving Izuku in shock. A quirk that could be passed down? This turned everything everyone knew about quirks upside down. He leaned in closer, eager to catch any additional details about the quirk, but was soon disappointed when All Might didn't elaborate further. What he did discuss was why Izuku couldn't inherit the quirk. He wasn't heroic enough, he lacked the drive. Yet, he was known by every police officer in Japan as a vigilante overlord. To say it frustrated him would be an understatement. Just then, a snake wriggled around his chest, reminding him of why he was watching this in the first place. If he didn't initiate the conversation, his parents might jump to the wrong conclusions, jeopardizing his chance for a peaceful life. At that moment, Izumi spoke up. Izuku has a quirk. What? Both of his parents responded in confusion, thinking they had misheard their daughter. She repeated herself, providing more detail than before. He showed us. Izuku had horns and a tail, and his teeth were so sharp. He acted so differently, and her voice began to crack as she struggled to explain, his words still fresh in her mind. Everyone else started to comfort her as she began to sob. Izuku watched in silent frustration, realizing she was about to complicate his plans significantly. Yet all he could do was observe. When Izumi's crying subsided to mere sniffles, her parents exchanged worried glances, struggling to comprehend what she was saying. It made no sense to them. But then Viridian Tornado recalled something important. Some police officers had mentioned that there were too many gangs in the Aldra area. Could it be that her sweet child was under the influence of something? She turned to her husband so quickly that he thought she might have hurt herself. Izuku had to crank up the volume on his phone to catch their conversation and nearly burst into laughter when he grasped the situation. They didn't believe her. Their beloved daughter, their shining star. And still, they doubted her. He was definitely going to share this in the chat, even if it meant exposing the identities of the top heroes. The heroes then turned to the teenagers who had been standing there, waiting for the adults to finish their discussion. All Might was the first to speak up. Did any of you happen to take something unusual today? You couldn't expect subtlety from a man whose career was built on massive property damage and chaos caused by villains. For once, Izumi quickly understood what her father meant. We aren't under any influence. He really does have a quirk. We all saw the same thing, so it can't be because of something else. She shouted, stomping her foot like a child throwing a tantrum. Izuku was surprised by this. He knew his sister was childish and naive, but he didn't realize it was to this extent. He let out a few muffled giggles at her antics. It was quite entertaining. Viridian Tornado looked at her with sympathy and replied softly, "We'll look into it, okay dear? But let's go home first and have dinner, it's getting late." Looking out the window, Izuku noticed the sun was already setting. He had been there much longer than he intended and had barely touched his food. When he glanced back at his phone, he saw his family and former friends walking off into the sunset, like a scene from a TV show. Stretching, he called Shin over to ask for a bag, planning to make a quick stop before heading home, intending to eat on the way. He said his goodbyes and left the shop with his backpack and bag. Initially, he wanted to reveal to his family that he had a quirk but had no intention of becoming a hero, just to spite them. However, right now, he could create a rift between his parents and sister, perhaps even disrupt Izumi's friendships. It would be far more entertaining than their momentary shock. He walked quickly, turning the usual 15-minute stroll into a 10-minute dash. The neighborhood he was in was just above the slums, with a high crime rate and few patrolling heroes, making it the perfect place to hide their base. Most criminals would hide weapons, drags, or false documents there. For him, it was snakes, 450 different snakes. He didn't have a problem. They had all agreed to work with him and were essential for his quirk. Trying to convince himself that this was completely normal, he opened the door to a seemingly run-down factory. Inside, however, it was entirely different, having been renovated with various nooks and crannies for the snakes to rest in. He couldn't enjoy the warm atmosphere for long if he wanted to claim he took the scenic route home. Walking to the center of the room, he let Dandelion, Show, and the snake with a sensory quirk slither off him before reaching the couch in the middle of the building. Ivory made her way up to his shoulders, shifting back to her original size, while Shro slithered next to him. Could you send 2 glamour snakes over here? One for short range and one for long range, he asked Ivory telepathically while picking up a shiny trinket from the table and fidgeting with it. He just liked shiny things, nothing more, nothing less. Ivory confirmed, and within a minute, the 2 snakes appeared. They looked similar, likely siblings, as their quirks functioned in much the same way. Both required a lot of concentration and would cause the user to become invisible if used on them. He tried his best to memorize all the snake's quirks, but there were more details in his notes. Writing on his computer and uploading pictures was much safer than risking them in the Bakuga's blast radius. With a quick nod to both snakes, he let them slide up his legs and under his shirt, having long since gotten used to them shrinking under Shro's quirk. Izuku smirked to himself as they settled in. He wondered how Izumi would react when no one believed her. Before Izuku even opened the door, he could hear shouting. The argument had likely resumed. He braced himself before stepping inside, knowing he needed to act perfectly to ruin Izumi. The shouting ceased immediately when he opened the door. He called out that he was home, slipping on a cheerful yet anxious expression. As he entered the living room, he saw everyone sitting on the couch except a furious Izumi. The others stared at him with a mix of concern, anger, disgust, pity, and whatever emotion was on Shoka's face. Surprisingly, Inko was the first to speak. "My little Izuku. Since when was your skin like that?" "You're as pale as a ghost," she exclaimed, her voice trembling as tears began to well in her eyes. Of all the things she could have said, this was it? It was a bit disappointing, honestly. But he couldn't let that show, so he settled for a subtle guilt trip instead. He fidgeted with his hands, stammering out a response. It hurt a bit when I woke up. But you were at the hero convention. I didn't want to spoil your fun, and it stopped hurting after a few days, so I thought it was fine, and I didn't want to bother you like that." His nervous rambling was abruptly interrupted when Inko threw herself against him, sobbing. "I'm so sorry. I never knew something like that happened. Did you do anything reckless? Next time something like this happens, you have to tell us. We don't want you to get hurt." She seemed to overlook the fact that, as his mother, she hadn't noticed the change in him as she rocked him back and forth. After hearing all of that, Toshinori stood up and joined the embrace, speaking up. "I agree with your mother. You're much more sensitive to your surroundings than we are. You need to be more careful." Izumi bit her lip, glancing at her friends, who were all staring at the ground before slowly looking up at her. They nodded collectively, though Shoka appeared to be the only one sympathetic enough to suggest they should apologize. Knowing that Izuku's behavior today was impulsive, much like Katsuki's, it seemed to work out. But when she looked up at Izuku, she was taken aback by his expression. He looked repulsed by their parents' affection. Seeing that, Izumi's emotions flared, and she used her quirk to push him away from their parents, sending him crashing against the wall. How could he be angry at their parents? They had done nothing but love him, and he chose to respond with disgust? Before she could scold him for his lack of respect, Toshinori transformed into his muscular form and confronted her. "Young lady, what do you think you're doing?" he exclaimed, pointing a finger at her in indignation, his usual smile absent. Izumi, shocked by her father's hostility, quickly replied in a panic, "Didn't you see his face? He looked disgusted. That's no way to treat either of you after loving him all his life." Her anger only intensified, and she and her father continued to argue while Izuku slowly got up. This was definitely not how he had envisioned things going. He knew Izumi wouldn't think clearly after he had shown his disgust, but throwing him against the wall was bold and painful. The shouting from the two of them didn't help either. Inko stood frozen, looking between her injured son and furious daughter, but at least she wasn't screaming, so he considered that a small victory. Izuku gingerly got to his feet, holding his head, which had started to bleed. He had already decided to confront his sister, so he had to follow through. He glanced at the two of them. Izumi was floating objects around in her fury while All Might continued to raise his voice. Their friends stood in shock, unsure of whether to side with the number one hero or their friend. As they grappled with their moral dilemma, Izuku stood up, putting on his innocent expression. All Might? He exclaimed in shock, drawing everyone's attention. Toshinori shrank back into his more slender form, coughing slightly, regretting that he had revealed so much to his son. The energetic green-haired boy's eyes sparkled with excitement, which quickly shifted to concern when he noticed the blood. He rushed to his father, asking if he was okay and if he needed an ambulance. Both Inko and Toshinori felt proud of the kind-hearted boy they had raised. Even if he was too fragile to be a hero, he still cared deeply for those around him. "I'm fine, my boy," Toshinori managed to reply with a cough. Watching this unfold, Izumi began to doubt herself. Had she really been so intoxicated by anger that she hurt her little brother? This couldn't be the same boy who had looked at her with such cold eyes and told her to jump off a roof. As the conversation between father and son continued, Izuku exclaimed, "You were All Might? That's so awesome. Everyone's always been wondering what your quirk was, but no one must have thought it had a transforming aspect." His excitement was cut short by his mother chuckling fondly, causing him to blush in embarrassment as he tried to apologize. But Toshinori beat him to it, recounting his battle against All for One and the history behind his quirk. Izuku found it difficult to hide his fascination with his father's story. He had heard it before, but the ease with which Toshinori shared this information made him uneasy. All he would need to do was use the recording from the suburban neighborhood and create an anonymous account at the library, and the number one hero would be in serious trouble. When Toshinori finished recounting his story for the second time that day, Izuku forced out more mumbles about the quirk. But he still needed to maintain his facade as a hero wannabe to make Izumi appear untrustworthy to the heroes. "I have a question. See, can I be a hero too when I'm quirkless?" he asked, lowering his voice to seem more nervous, achieving the desired effect of pitying looks from his parents. He couldn't wait to show them just how much power he had. But he would have to wait just as he had for the past 4 years. Toshinori shook his head, a sad yet determined expression on his face. "No. I have been injured this badly while having one for all already. I cannot imagine what someone without a quirk would do in such a situation." The oldest Yagi tried to remain composed, but he couldn't hide his concern for his son's well-being. Everyone in the room felt their hearts ache at the distressed expression on the young boy's face. They knew the truth had to be spoken, but it was painful to see such a sweet child look so sorrowful. Izuku quietly confirmed his understanding before excusing himself, attempting to make his way to his room. The key word being attempting, as Izumi dashed in front of him and enveloped him in a warm hug. Unsure if the recent events were merely a figment of his imagination, she felt it was important to express her feelings now. "I know we've treated you poorly over the years, and I want to apologize. Please understand that we did it out of concern for your safety." All the teenagers nodded in agreement, while the adults exchanged puzzled glances at their daughter's words. Izuku returned the hug, and for a moment, it seemed they had reconciled. But then he spoke in a voice that sent a chill down her spine. "No one will believe you." Izumi stood frozen as Izuku released her and revealed a smirk before transforming it into a more innocent smile as he walked away. Once his door was closed, Izuku leaped onto his bed, grabbing his phone to share the events of his day, knowing his friends would be chatting for a while in the living room. However, he realized it would take longer than he initially thought when he heard Izumi scream again. At the end of the chapter, I will include a section for pairing suggestions, as there are many combinations to consider. I want to clarify that I won't be writing a harem or any romantic relationships between Izuku and his teachers. However, I might explore a romantic subplot between Aizawa and Yamada if there's interest. Yuga Aoyama is a sarcastic character with questionable fashion sense, paired with a dramatic fashionista who has an eye for flair. Together, they would create a fabulous duo, showcasing a variety of stylish outfits. Mina Ishido is playful and affectionate, often making cheeky jokes. The two would engage in constant flirting, especially if it makes their less than heroic classmates uncomfortable. They would also enjoy pop culture references and spontaneous song and dance battles. Tsuyu Azui is straightforward and honest. Izuku would often respond with passive-aggressive remarks, while Azui would support him with her no-nonsense attitude. Tenya Ida is the rule follower, always trying to keep Izuku in line, even if his efforts seem futile. He would pretend not to notice when Izuku trips Katsuki, adding a layer of humor to their dynamic. Achiko Uraraka is sweet and caring. Initially, she would befriend Izumi and her group, but upon realizing their true nature, she would join Izuku's quest for justice, creating a wholesome yet chaotic partnership. Mashiro Ojiro is a dedicated sparring partner, and Izuku would find himself admiring Ojiro's skills, even when he loses. Ojiro would be puzzled by Izuku's enjoyment of their playful tussles. Denki Kaminari loves referencing movies, both pre-quirk and pro-quirk. Together, they would create chaos, making it their mission to annoy Bakugo and his friends. Eijiro Kirishima is the bright sunshine to Izuku's darker moments, bringing out a lighter side of him that surprises their classmates. Koji Koda represents the introvert paired with an extrovert, creating a dynamic where they either bond or clash, especially if anyone disrespects their friendship. Rikido Sato is confident and short, while his partner is a shy giant. They would engage in friendly baking competitions, leaving their friends envious of their culinary skills. Mizo Shoji is a quiet extrovert, and he would enjoy peaceful moments with his introverted partner, preferring to keep their circle small. Kyoka Jiro is exploring different music genres, while her partner is a heavy metal enthusiast. They would have secret rock concerts, enjoying each other's company as they jam together. Hantasiro is full of energy, always making puns and jokes. With his partner, they would create a whirlwind of excitement, keeping everyone on their toes. Fumikage Tokoyami embodies the balance of light and dark. Their relationship, including Dark Shadow, would be filled with sarcasm and moments of unexpected sweetness. Shoto Todoroki starts off siding with his sister but soon realizes the similarities between Izuku and Tuya. He would try to convince Shoka that her actions are misguided, leading to a pivotal moment during the sports festival where Izuku agrees to help Shoto confront his past. Toru Hagakure and her partner bond over their shared experiences of being overlooked, creating a dynamic filled with energy and camaraderie. Momo Yaoyorozu is a confident genius, and with Izuku's encouragement, she would grow even more self-assured, aiming for greatness together. Hitoshi Shinso is an energetic insomniac, and he would bond with his tired counterpart over shared experiences, including their love for cats and discussions about their struggles. Nito Monoma is a sarcastic drama king, and his interactions with his partner would lead to constant banter. However, they would fiercely defend each other against outside insults. Katsuki Bakuga's feelings could be complicated, potentially leading to a one-sided affection that he struggles to understand, especially if he discovers that Deku is the one he truly cares for. Katsumi Bakuga might exhibit similar tendencies, but with a more intense and obsessive nature. Shoka Todoroki is portrayed as someone who is determined and won't easily back down, even when involved with someone else. Izumi Yagi is a character I prefer not to delve into too deeply, as I want to keep the story lighthearted. Ultimately, Izuku may choose to remain single, focusing on his own journey and growth. Izuku really enjoyed the months after showcasing his quirk. His parents couldn't believe that Izumi and her friends were willing to stand up to the top heroes by supporting their daughter. They even insisted she see a therapist. Why not a doctor was beyond him, but it did give him a good laugh. In fact, he found so much amusement in watching his former friends and family struggle that time flew by. Thankfully, the teachers and students stopped bothering him as well. Although he did receive dozens of confused looks regarding his sudden mutations, most people quickly backed off when he shot them a glare. Fortunately, there weren't many people trying to engage with him, as they were more focused on their own career paths. He still planned on attending UA, even though he no longer wanted to be a hero, and surprisingly, his motivation wasn't solely to spite his former friends. Despite UA being renowned for its hero courses, its other programs were among the best in Japan, albeit criminally underrated. His first choice was the business course because he already ran a vigilante network and figured he might as well learn how to improve it. Although he wasn't sure what there was to improve, considering his snakes were the only ones recruiting, he believed UA would provide him with a solid overview of what he lacked. So, he spent the next 6 months studying how to hold presentations, persuade others, read expressions, and even how to intimidate. Okay, so it leaned more toward manipulation than bargaining, but people probably wouldn't notice the difference. He was currently reading a post online about why psychological tactics were common in business, and the author made some valid points. Before he could finish, his phone pinged. Half closing his laptop and grabbing his phone, careful not to disturb Titan snuggled up next to him, he began reading the message. It was just an update on the Nest's expansion in America, detailing when the next shipment would arrive in Japan. He couldn't let his snakes use his power source without physical contact, and it also mentioned the types of people who had joined. He was half focused on the spreadsheet and half listening to an argument between Genist, McQueen, and Decaf about which hero was the most attention-seeking. Izuku smiled to himself as Elsa joined in with a hero from the Netherlands named Vorjachi. But unfortunately, something interrupted his good mood. Izumi and Shoka walked into the White Dove and headed straight for him. Shin, who had been engrossed in one of his favorite novels, noticed them and quickly activated a red light under all the tables where Nest members were seated. Each table had one for safety in case someone deemed dangerous by Jormungandr showed up. Izuku had been running this operation for 5 years, and since this place was one of the earliest safe houses he established, he made sure it was well equipped. As the two girls approached, his smile faded, replaced by annoyance. Surprisingly, Shoka spoke first, despite his perception of her as a quiet doormat. "Hey, Izukuin? Can we talk to you in private?" Izuku grimaced at the nickname. No one had called him that in years, and he preferred to keep it that way. It brought back too many unpleasant memories. After a tense pause, he finally replied, "No," and turned back to his phone. Unfortunately, before he could put his earbuds back in, Shoka continued, "But why? We just want to talk to you. There's no need to be rude." Her high-pitched voice grated painfully against his and Titan's ears, waking the cat with an annoyed meow. He barely had time to respond before Izumi backed her up with even more yelling. "You have no right to say no to her. She's been kind to you this entire time, so you don't get to treat her like that." Izumi ended her outburst with a pout, likely expecting him to sigh and relent. She apparently hadn't understood his previous hints, or maybe their parents and therapist had convinced her she was imagining things. He needed to put a stop to this. As willing as he was to stretch things out and alter his plans just to get back at his abusers, he had too much self-respect to tolerate someone yelling in his face. Sighing, he closed his laptop completely and turned off his phone, knowing the two girls were far too nosy. Looking back at them, he shifted from annoyance to genuine anger. The two girls flinched. They had seen him frustrated before but never outright angry. "I said no. I have every right to refuse to talk to either of you. All you're doing now is causing a scene." Shoka wanted to respond but quickly held her tongue when she noticed the dozens of eyes on them. From an outsider's perspective, it would look like she was harassing him. She had always struggled with public speaking, and now that she realized people were judging her, she couldn't find her voice. Izumi, however, had no such issue. She pointed an accusatory finger at him and yelled again, "You're the one causing the scene. If you weren't so stuck up, we could have walked out of here and had a civil conversation, but no. You just had to make yourself the center of attention." Her quirk activated unconsciously, causing small objects to topple over. Titan began hissing at her, but she ignored him. Izuku noticed from the corner of his eye that Shin had gotten up and was approaching their table, but he didn't stop him. After taking a deep breath, Izumi continued berating him, oblivious to the fact that her little brother wasn't even listening. "You've always been like this. People won't just bend over backwards for you just because you're quirkless. Doing this is so stupid that—" She was interrupted when a hand was placed on her shoulder. "Don't touch me," Izumi snapped, shoving the hand away without looking to see who it was. Before she could continue her tirade, Shin addressed her coldly. "Miss, I'm going to ask you to quiet down and perhaps take this outside." Both girls turned to him, and Izuku sent Shin a reassuring glance. It was comforting to have allies who understood him. Izumi, still fuming, likely didn't notice that Shin was wearing the white dove's uniform before she began to yell at him. "Don't talk to me like that. This is between the two of us and has nothing to do with you." Shoka murmured a small, "Three of us," with tears in her eyes, but no one paid her any mind. Izuku flashed a confident smile at Shin, knowing he would understand. Seeing that he needed to remove Izumi from the premises, Shin donned his customer service smile as he addressed her. "Miss, while I see that you and him are in quite the argument, you are disturbing the other customers. From what I've heard, this gentleman does not wish to speak with you." His tone was cold, making it clear she was unwelcome. But Izumi, lacking common sense, didn't take the hint. "Get me your manager. I'm a future hero and won't be treated like this." Tears filled her eyes, and Shoka tried to comfort her, sending a glare toward Shin at the same time. Most customers were from the nest, but others felt awkward, quickly eating and drinking, hoping the situation would calm down. Izuku was enjoying the spectacle, even pulling out his phone to start filming after Shin intervened. "What are you waiting for?" Izumi yelled, her voice cracking into sobs. Shin maintained his customer service smile as he replied, "While I could call the manager, I don't think he would be able to do anything to me, considering I'm the owner." Both girls froze in shock, while Izuku struggled to suppress his laughter, especially at the sight of Izumi looking like a deer caught in headlights. After a tense silence, Shin continued, "I believe you've disturbed my customers enough for one day, and I kindly ask you to leave before I call security." His voice was firmer now, dropping the customer service facade. Izumi snapped out of her stupor when Shoka literally shook her, finally realizing they had made the entire cafe uncomfortable. Yet neither of them moved to leave. Shin rubbed his temples and sighed. "Fine then. Security." Everyone gasped in horror as Shin collapsed to the ground, struck by a flying vase. A heavy silence fell over the cafe until Shin groaned from the floor, and chaos erupted. Customers screamed, phones were pulled out to call for help, and cats meowed in panic as they dodged the commotion. Both girls stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. They didn't even notice when Izuku rushed to Shin's side, accidentally bumping into Titan, as he attempted to apply his limited first aid skills. He carefully turned the adult over, trying to assess the damage, but Shin's dark blue hair obscured his view. The scent of blood filled the air, and Izuku felt a wave of dread wash over him as he noticed the crimson streaks running down Shin's face. He quickly shook his head, trying to calm himself. He hadn't brought his usual supplies, and the snakes he had weren't much help for first aid. First, he needed to check for a skull fracture. Turning to ask Izumi how hard she had thrown that vase, he found she had already fled. She ran away, just like the other heroes, leaving one of their own behind, crushed but still salvageable if they hadn't fled at the first sign of danger. He didn't have a sterilized cloth, but there should be a first aid kit somewhere behind the counter. After gently laying Shin down and watching the last of the customers leave, he leaped over the counter and searched frantically. He didn't bother picking up the items his tail had knocked over in his haste. There were no visible weapons, but no med kit either. He dashed to the employees-only door and flung it open, leaving a handprint where he had gripped it. Spotting a med kit, he snatched it and was back at Shin's side in an instant. Izuku hurriedly opened it as Shin closed his eyes and groaned again. "Stay awake, all right?" His voice was shaky and anxious as he tried to help. Thankfully, Shin opened his eyes again, though barely, looking dazed. Izuku's hands trembled as he tore open the kit and grabbed bandages and disinfectant. He gently moved Shin's long black hair aside, tangled in debris, and applied the bandage. Shin whimpered softly, like a lost puppy. Izuku was careful not to apply too much pressure, fearing a fracture that could worsen the injury. His vision blurred with tears as he began to cough, smoke swirling through the building, but he pushed on. If not for himself, then for one of the few heroes he admired, who lay nearly unconscious before him. Izuku didn't even register when the paramedics arrived, barely remembering being pulled away from his injured friend. Some part of him hoped the snakes would keep his mutations hidden from everyone. But he felt nothing but despair, as if everything was crashing down around him. She fractured Shin's skull. Fortunately, There wouldn't be any lasting damage other than a scar, but he would need to stay in the hospital for about 3 weeks. However, that wasn't the main issue. The real problem was that Izumi had the audacity to do something like that in broad daylight. Normally, she would have gotten away with it, as such an incident on her record could jeopardize her career as a hero. But this time, the most wanted vigilante in Japan had witnessed her actions and was determined to expose her. While he couldn't confront her physically, he was more than capable of tearing her down mentally. He was already manipulating local news articles to question how a promising young hero could commit such an act. He altered the articles that labeled her a villain, as the black and white hero worship contradicted everything he believed in. However, the reporters he confronted were working overtime to tarnish her image in hopes of regaining his favor, which was a small consolation. Her parents scolded her but still encouraged her aspirations of becoming a hero, attempting to shield her from the media fallout. Their efforts were quickly undermined when Shin confided in his green-haired best friend that he wanted to sue her but didn't know how. When Izuku offered to help, Shin was initially skeptical. His skepticism turned to shock when Izuku sent him a friend request through his Jormungandr account instead of his Moskai account. It was clear that All Might and Viridian Tornado could no longer salvage their daughter's reputation, especially since the Nest was openly involved in the case. The second Hydra's head was not discreet, and their actions could easily overshadow even Endeavor's HR team. Considering how many lawsuits were thrown at that man daily, it was impressive how much attention they were drawing from the police and heroes, who likely thought they were preparing for a move. They would be safe as long as there wasn't enough evidence for a search warrant. Izuku realized he needed to enhance the security of the server, especially for devices that had permission to access it. Currently, the only barrier preventing the police from dismantling everything was the code that one of his snakes had provided, which only worked once. If someone lost their device, they would need to visit a specific location at a designated time to request a new code. The locations were randomly chosen, and only a few people would be present at the specified time. If anyone took longer than a month to show up, they would be locked out of the nest. If even one person made a mistake, the authorities could gain access to the nest that Izuku had worked so hard to build. But he could always consult a teacher about how to create a secure website, framing it as a fun project. There was just one tiny problem with his plan: Netsu. The smartest being in Japan, who also happened to be the principal. He wasn't likely to be a significant obstacle, as he barely paid attention to students from other courses, at least from what Izuku could gather. There were plenty of UA dropouts, and he wasn't sure whether to be surprised or not. Some even claimed there was a teacher who expelled entire classes at once, but no one was brave enough to name him. All they had was a description of a scraggly, relatively tall man in his late 20s to early 30s, with long black hair and glowing red eyes, a hero with an obvious mental quirk. There was so much chaos, and everyone was running away as if their lives depended on it. Izuku shook his head, trying to clear the fog of that memory. He refused to dwell on the last time he had gone out as Jormungandr, the moment when the police had gotten a description of him and his reputation had soared. Fortunately, he was in his assault form, which meant he was less likely to be recognized on the street, but he still wouldn't take any chances. It didn't matter how irrational it seemed, Izuku was terrified of being discovered and putting everyone in his nest at risk. He shook his head again, this time slapping his cheeks lightly to snap himself back to reality. He didn't have the luxury to think about such things when he was about to take his exam. Arriving at UA an hour and a half early, he hoped to avoid Izumi and her friends. That reminded him, didn't Shoka's brother take the recommendation exam? He recalled hearing about it during one of their many sleepovers, along with the quirk marriage topic that had nearly made him forget all the sleep he lost due to the girls and Katsuki's loud discussions. Nearly. As he walked through the gates, he felt a wave of relief when the alarm didn't go off. He wanted to blend in and not draw attention to himself, and setting off the security alarm on exam day would definitely not help with that. However, even though he had avoided the alarm, he still found the doors locked. Deciding to wait for someone to open them, he logged into the chat, not the nest, but the one where all his friends were. He didn't want to risk being discovered. The stout could likely figure out what he was doing on Izuku's phone as Moskai. So, he remained as Cinnamon Roll. Cinnamon Roll. Got here way too early, the school's still. Coconut speech. Go give them a scare so bad that those hero types want to retire. Sparkles fawn sparkles. Keep the swearing to a minimum, please. I just woke up. Best genist Kinney. No need to worry. After just one glance at you, they won't be able to resist your charm. Judges. Hobbit. Where do you find the motivation to keep doing this? Lightning McQueen. I could use some of that for my homework. First of all, Deku is a disgrace. Sometimes I wonder why I'm still here. I'm going to dash Imma. Some death. My dash MT. Second of all, I have a feeling you're doing this just to annoy me. Skyrim dude. What we're all trying to say is good luck. Hobbit. Just you, Coco, and Genist. Leave the rest of us out of this. Discrimus a bitch. I'd like to wish him luck too. Hobbit. Well, you weren't quick enough to be included. Cinnamon roll. Only 4 of you? I'm offended. Deku is a disgrace. When aren't you? Sparkles fawn sparkles. To be honest, you are a bit of a drama king. Best genist Kinney. Excuse me? Lightning McQueen. You, my friend, are the drama emperor. No mere king can compete with you. Best genist Kinney. I'm glad you recognize the truth, favorite peasant. Hobbit. We get it, McQueen, you're a fan. Sparkles fawn sparkles. Ooh, what's the ship name? Lightning McQueen. I'm not a fan. Coconut speech. Then what are you? Cinnamon roll. A donkey. Hobbit. An animated race car. Lightning McQueen. The favorite peasant. Discrimus a bitch. Currently, that's you. Sparkles fawn sparkles. Better watch out before someone takes that title. Cinnamon roll. I'll fight you for it. Izuku could only write half of his reply before someone approached him. Whipping his head around, he saw the voice hero, Present Mike. His quirk allowed him to amplify his voice, giving him an ability similar to a sonic scream. The sound of his voice was powerful enough that it had been reported to cause discomfort to those nearby. One of his most common weaknesses was that his screams did not travel well underground, making his quirk ineffective against anything buried beneath the earth. Hey there, little listener. Just wanted to let you know that the exam starts in a little more than an hour, so while you came here pretty early, we can't officially let you in yet, you dig? The blonde man gave him an awkward finger gun gesture at the end. Izuku really didn't want to stay outside and didn't want to guilt trip one of his teachers, so he replied casually, "It's fine. I came this early on purpose to avoid people. Would you mind calling me over when you can let me in?" There was an awkward silence for a few seconds before the hero responded, "Sure, little listener. I'll talk to Nedzu and see if I can let you in early, so see you in a bit." After a few more finger guns, Izuku was alone again. He spent the few minutes waiting for Present Mike to think about his quirk, as he could rarely go wrong with that. With his quirk, there had to be mutations, like his hearing being better protected so he wouldn't go deaf, or his vocal cords being modified for more efficient use. This brought up the theory that he could use his voice at different frequencies, which was a whole other topic. If he could use his quirk at different frequencies, would he be able to send a specific message to his allies while masking it from others? Though that might not be great for his public image. Izuku noticed someone approaching again, mumbling to themselves until they were about 6 feet away. He turned to see Present Mike, looking surprised that he had noticed him. "Wow, little listener. You've got some good observational skills there," the hero exclaimed in a cheerful tone, and Izuku was surprised that it sounded genuine. "Thanks. My quirk sharpens my senses, but I've also gotten good at noticing people so my classmates can't sneak up on me anymore." He physically couldn't call them his friends without feeling uneasy, and he was relieved he hadn't done so. Present Mike seemed to catch the nuance in his words, perhaps aware of the discrimination against those with physical mutations that weren't conventionally appealing. "That's really impressive, little guy. I can't wait to see what you can do at the exams with that. I'm sure you'll impress the judges." Present Mike continued to radiate positivity, but Izuku could sense a hint of concern behind it. The question lingered. Did he want the heroes to investigate his family and previous school? He wouldn't use the nest for that. It would be too suspicious. "Just follow me," Present Mike said, leading Izuku into a giant auditorium that held far more people than he had expected for the business course. Now that he thought about it, he hadn't actually told Present Mike which course he was trying for. The hero turned to him, hands on his hips. Just take a random seat, and I'll bring you the leaflet for the heroics entrance exam. Izuku gave him the most unimpressed expression he could muster and spoke in a firm voice. Sir, I get that I didn't tell you which course I was trying for, but I'm going for the business course. I have no intention of being a pro hero. Present Mike seemed caught off guard, his face quickly shifting to a guilty expression. He waved his arms around while apologizing in a loud tone, likely activating his quirk without realizing it. I'm so sorry, little listener. I didn't mean to assume that. Vlad just mentioned you were one of the kids who would probably try to get an early start, and I just went with it. Ding, I feel really bad now. The normally energetic hero scratched his head and quickly led me to the business entrance exam, offering a stream of apologies. Izuku was relieved that it seemed to be an accident, but he hoped that not everyone would react that way. The written test for the business course was straightforward, essentially mirroring the general education exam, but with essay questions at the back focused on general knowledge about business operations. Izuku couldn't tell if the test was simply easy or if he was overly prepared for it. What troubled him wasn't the anxiety about passing the test, it was the second part that completely overshadowed his worries. They would be observing the potential hero students, considering the best ways to market them, and then presenting their findings. UA was a hero school, but there were many other professions that had little to do with heroics. The presentation aspect made sense, but the idea of it being a live analysis felt uncomfortable to him. Judging by the expressions of about a third of the examinees, he wasn't alone in his discomfort. Now that he had a quirk, he wouldn't be ignored if he asked questions, as disheartening as that was. Still, he chose to remain silent. There was still discrimination against mutant quirks, and as much as he hoped UA was different, he didn't want to take any chances. So, he kept quiet as everyone was divided into groups and given tablets. Unfortunately, he had to provide good advice for Izumi, but her tired and snappy demeanor made it somewhat easier. She must be under immense stress with the media and a lawsuit looming over her. He even overheard Toshinori mention that One for All wasn't working anymore. It was tough for her. But the most important thing was the incredible variety of quirks in the exam. Izuku knew there would be all sorts of quirks at a heroics entrance exam, but it was still a sight to behold. There was a blonde who seemed to switch between quirks, likely a copy quirk. It probably only lasted a few minutes, but it was hard to tell from the video footage. It was such an amazing quirk. Izuku wondered if there was a limit to how many quirks the blonde could store. He knew there had to be a limit based on his own experience. He couldn't focus solely on one examinee, though. There was a redhead whose skin turned to something resembling stone, but it appeared he couldn't move while his quirk was active. It seemed simple on the surface, but many questions arose. Did his skin regenerate in that state? Did the toughness depend on muscle density? Were those shark teeth part of his quirk? Did it rely on a time limit or his stamina? Probably the latter. The next examinee was a boy with gravity-defying purple hair and dark circles under his eyes that hinted at his struggles. Izuku initially thought he had a strong emitter-type quirk, given his lanky build. However, when the boy grabbed a pipe to attack a robot, he hesitated but eventually managed to stab a pole through one of its eyes. From that performance, Izuku speculated it might be a mental quirk or something similar. It was disappointing that the boy seemed to think UA wouldn't conduct such evaluations. It may be a hero school, but it clearly wasn't what the media portrayed. He could worry about how challenging the school year would be and when to transfer later. Right now, there were too many quirks to analyze and too little time. He also needed to think about how to market them, which was the purpose of this exam. Looking back at the screen, he saw Izumi yelling at a boy who appeared to have some rock mutation. The poor kid looked close to tears. Not exactly heroic, Izumi. Totally not cool. Next, Izuku focused on a girl with brown hair who initially seemed to have telepathy. However, she couldn't move objects afterward. She had to push them and then clap her hands to release them from her control. That didn't qualify as telekinesis or telepathy. Perhaps her quirk was something like levitation or related to gravity. Like reducing the gravity of an object when touched with 5 fingers. And that opened a whole new set of questions. Could she manipulate the amount of gravity she removed? Did the reduction vary with different object sizes? Is a heavier one more tiring or a larger one? Izuku quickly noted everything down on a Word document before continuing to watch her. She had the strangest quirk he had seen in a while. He sipped on his water and turned back to the live feed, nearly spitting it out. Not only was the gravity float girl stuck underneath a pile of rubble, but the zero-pointer was also significantly larger than a skyscraper. Everyone was fleeing from the robotic monstrosity while the brown-haired girl struggled to escape from the concrete, clearly exhausted and unable to use her quirk effectively. Izuku felt a bit on edge, considering that what he had seen from UA wasn't all that impressive, but there had to be some kind of emergency stop for the robot. As he quickly checked all the cameras, he spotted a green blur among the crowd, running toward the giant robot instead of away from it. His eyes widened as he tried to discern who was attempting to help the girl. What would have been admiration quickly turned into annoyance when he realized it was Izumi using her quirk to propel herself forward. He had to admit, albeit begrudgingly, that helping the girl was a noble thing to do. Izumi slowed to a stop in front of the girl and, instead of asking if she was okay, she stared at the giant robot. The injured girl let out a pained whimper and tried to speak, but unfortunately, the feed didn't have any audio, nor was the camera close enough for him to read her lips. The screen shook as the zero-pointer moved closer, now only a step away from crushing the girl. Izuku thought that his sister would use her telekinesis, but once again, he was proved wrong. She somehow activated One for All, which shouldn't have been working at that moment, and then yelled, "Smash," as she punched the robot. In doing so, she managed to injure herself, breaking both the leg she jumped with and the arm she punched with. Maybe that's what Toshinori meant by One for All not working. Perhaps it strained her body when she used it. He quickly pushed aside the thought that using her telepathy would have been much more efficient. He had spent his entire life with her, so he knew it wasn't a lack of stamina as she plummeted to the ground. Izuku suppressed a laugh as the float gravity girl slapped his sister to save her, which was almost as funny as the look of pure astonishment and confusion on Izumi's face. He watched his sister scream at the girl, who was still stuck under the rubble, for a few seconds before Present Mike announced that the entrance exam was over. The brown-haired girl looked hurt as Izumi used her quirk to float away, appearing on the brink of passing out, still not helping her out from under the rubble. Really? He couldn't even justify this behavior as her being stressed about the lawsuit. Izuku sighed as he tore his eyes from the footage and leaned back in his chair. It shouldn't be too hard for him to compose a presentation in the 2 hours that were left. Picking up his notes, he reviewed all the examinees he had managed to analyze. His first pick was the redhead, but that was too easy and probably wouldn't get him into the business course. Float Gravity Girl's quirk raised too many questions, as did the eternally tired purple-headed teen. So, his obvious choice was the blonde. Fishing out his laptop, he opened a Word document and began copying all his notes over, then started refining them. With only 5 minutes left, someone entered the room, and Izuku planned to give whoever it was a quick glance and nothing more. But that didn't happen. Looking up from his computer, he saw a gray scarf and long black hair. The underground hero was stuck there, and no one was trying to save him. All his colleagues were just running away. Izuku sat frozen, staring at the man as his breathing quickened. There was so much blood, and his instincts told him that the man didn't have much time left. Noticing someone staring at him, the sleep-deprived hero looked over his shoulder as the teacher who had been watching over them read whatever was brought. Izuku needed to act. It didn't matter how much smoke he inhaled or if he might end up injured by the end of the night. Crimson eyes locked with toxic green ones, widening in recognition as the most wanted vigilante in Japan rushed to the hero, steps thundering as reptilian legs stomped on the ground with a force that shook the floor. Neither of them spoke as there was no time for that. Jormungandr lifted the construction materials off the man and moved them aside. Izuku could now clearly see the damage done to the hero. The worst injuries were at his shoulders, which looked uneven. He needed to look anywhere else instead of into those eyes that resembled. Blood rushed from the man's injuries even faster as the vigilante hoisted him onto his back. Izuku flinched violently as the announcement came that the tests had ended and that the business course needed to go to another room. But he didn't catch which room because the hero, era. Hey, Eraserhead, the giant spoke to the trembling man as he moved them through the building as quickly as his large frame would allow. His mind was too filled with panic to call on one of his snake's quirks, God forbid one that would actually be useful. Izuku remained as still as a statue as the hero approached him. He couldn't be caught now. Don't die on me just yet, he thought. There were too many people he cared about still left. Wouldn't want to see your boyfriend, no, fiancé planning your funeral instead of your wedding, right? And so he did the only thing he could do. He ran. I'm back. After struggling with writer's block, I've managed to put together a chapter that I'm somewhat satisfied with. I haven't reread it yet since it's been 2 weeks since my last update, and I just don't have the mental energy to go through it all again. The official ship is now Izuku x Momo x Jiru. I spent a lot of time thinking about their dynamic and became quite invested in it. Plus, those two girls are really popular, so it fits well. I also have an idea I came up with at 3 a.m. that I can't stop thinking about, so please let me know your thoughts. Cheating. Inko and Dad for one. My Neta Minoru doesn't exist. I had considered rewriting the story and even completed the first 2 chapters, but I lost interest in the BNHA fandom and decided to step back from writing. If anyone wishes to take this idea and develop it further, please feel free to use this story as inspiration in your summary. Here's what I had planned for the story. After a tense chase, Izuku narrowly escapes UA as the security system activates, leaving behind enough evidence to identify him. Aware that arrest is imminent, he decides to pack his belongings and leave while he still can, intending to create a decoy later. When the blood sample is analyzed, it reveals Izuku's identity, and it becomes clear that Toshinori is not his biological father. After Inko had a night of poor judgment following Izuku's injury, she had a brief encounter with a charming man who had bought her a drink. The only records of this man trace back to the early days of quirks, leading to the shocking revelation that All for One is actually Izuku's father. The reasons behind this encounter are left to the imagination. I had some vague ideas about Izuku adopting a new identity, but Izumi discovers his plan and struggles to convince others of the truth after the previous incident. During the sports festival, she attempts to involve Detective Tsukachi, while Izuku watches from the sidelines. Nizu is aware of the situation but finds it too entertaining to intervene. Izuku meets Jiru and Momo, excitedly exchanging numbers after expressing his admiration for their quirks, while the League tries to reach out to the nest but fails. There was going to be an arc where the snakes were drawn to Izuku only because he could provide them with sustenance through his quirk, which would become an addictive source for them. Izuku would use this to his advantage, but it would also create a sense of distrust, knowing they might abandon him for a better option. I also envisioned a scene where Jormungandr makes a significant public appearance, prompting people to notice the similarities between him and All Might, as both convey the message, I am here. Additional events would unfold, leading to a civil war. As for the characters, I hadn't fleshed out many details, except that Quinn was destined to meet a tragic end and Shiro was a quirkless sniper for some reason. If I ever decide to write another story, I think I'll finish it completely before sharing it. So, see you next time. Maybe.